Okay, great. This is the regularly scheduled city council meeting. It is June 15th of 2023. Thanks to all who are attending. Appreciate it. We are going to start with a roll call.
Mayor Wusso,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Dame.
Here.
Councilor Schachter, Councilor Kaup, Councilor Weimer,
Here.
Councilor Zelinski. We have a quorum.
Great. I'm going to just mention that Councilor Godus is actually joining us remotely, simply to be able to watch the meeting. He's actually in a foreign destination. Okay. Any agenda changes or conflicts to this agenda? Okay, there are none. Council announcements. Councilor Schachter. Hold on one second. It's not popping up. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, go ahead.
I'll call this a public service announcement. Became clear again at Housing Commission. We have commission openings pretty much across the board, either as full or alternate. So I encourage everybody recruit and those to sign up because we need more eyes and ears out there. Thank you.
Great. Councilor Dem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As the liaison to the DDA, I would like to express my excitement that the downtown market on 7th is starting next Tuesday. Forget the time, but we're going to have over 30 vendors, and I understand between 7 and 8 they're actually produce vendors, so it's very, very exciting. Market on 7th going through September 20th.
This is anyone else here for council comments? Okay, great. This is a Strawberry Days weekend. So as a reminder, we had some issues with parking last year. The chamber has worked diligently to secure some parking opportunities. With shuttles running, you can park at the mall, and a shuttle will run every 15 minutes. There's also a few other local free lots that you can park in. I think the chamber has a map from the wrap on the Post Independent right now. If you flip through that, you'll be able to see some parking opportunities. We ask you so kindly not to park in areas for safety concerns that are marked no parking. So thank you for that. Okay,
Can I just add? There's also a bike corral.
oh yeah,
There will be bike parking that is supervised and corralled right at the, I guess it's the east end of Two Rivers Park, right when you come across the pedestrian bridge. So please ride your bike. You consider
that's
that.
great. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to citizens appearing before council. Now, these are for items not on tonight's agenda. You can come right up to the podium and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Do we have anyone online who would like to speak? Okay, with that, I will close that portion and bring it back to council for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
We'll move.
And a second?
Second.
Great. Moved by Councilor Schachter, second by Councilor Kaup. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Okay. We will move right along then to the 27th Street underpass update. That is item number 11 under actions and presentations.
Hi, council. Tracy Truelove is also online. She couldn't join us today, but she's gonna have the presentation up for us.
And your name?
oh,
also.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm Ben Ludlow, project manager for RAFTA, overseeing the construction of this project. And I'm gonna be Shelley's bodyguard in DC, so. 27th Street. So here's our update for you all. We're gonna do this once a month, as I guess was requested. So you get to see me once a month. I'll come in and say hi. Matt Langhorse asked me to give you a 47 slide presentation today. So let's get started on, I'm kidding, it's only 4 long, but he said 47. 27th Street underpass. So tomorrow is a big deal. We're having our groundbreaking ceremony at 10 a.m. I hope to see you all there. If you can't be there, you'll be missed, but it should be great. I'll be the MC organizer of it. We also have Dan Blankenship will have a small bit, and Shoshana Liu, the director for CDOT, is also there. So we'll have a good group doing a presentation. Also, Mary will also be there, and then we'll put on some hard hats and vests and pose with shovels and throw some dirt and get some cool photos.
Great.
So should be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Traffic impacts this week. So if anyone who's over on that side of town, you'll notice that we had lane closures on Highway 82. We had full closure of westbound 27th today to remove some the old railroad panels in that location in the Rio Grande Trail corridor. What we are continuing to do, and Tracy's doing this, and she might want to speak to it, maybe not. We're doing updates for traffic control every week of what our impacts are going to be for 82 and 27th Street, and getting that out, notice to the public.
Hey, Ben, can you hear me okay? Sorry.
Oh, we put wayfinding. You kind of see there's wayfinding signs for the Rio Grande Trail that says, if you come down the Rio Grande Trail and you see the closure and I need to get to the other side of wherever I am, how do I get there? And so that's what the wayfinding is. It also has some information on there for paratransit, for RAFTA, for contacting me, get that set up. There's some cool pictures of some of the railroad removal stuff that we did, which I think is pretty neat. For the next month, before I see you again, we'll have the temporary signal poles installed. That's scheduled for the week of the 26th for installation. It'll take a couple days to do that and get our concrete in the ground, our poles set, and we'll string wire. We'll get signal heads set up. We're also moving forward with our fill and detour pavement in the next week or two, a couple weeks. And then we'll have the traffic shift sometime in the next month for all traffic over to the west side of Highway 82. So we can begin construction on the east side of the tunnel. And that's really my update. Everything's moving along smoothly right now. Everybody seems comfortable on the project. And do you have any questions for me?
Any questions? Are you set? Do you have any questions for us?
I'm done. You don't have any questions for me? I'm
Okay,
gonna
great.
cruise on back
Yeah.
home in Marble.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank
perfect.
you. Thanks.
Okay, take care. Okay, let's move on to item number 12, State Proposition 123 Commitment Requirements.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Hannah Klausman, Community Development Director. You're going to be seeing a lot of me tonight. So strap in and let's take care of Proposition 123. So this, as you may recall, is the ballot measure passed last November at the state level for funding for affordable housing. There are several components of this measure for municipalities to opt in, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. So let's see here. We need to decide as a council, you need to decide as a council, whether the city of Glenwood Springs is first interested in making the commitment. And the commitment has several components and regulations that go along with it, which I included in your staff report. And one of them is a commitment to increase affordable housing by 3% annually for the next 3 years. So that's 2023, 2024, 2025. And then beyond that, there's another component about a fast track approval process, but we wouldn't be looking at that until sometime down the road. So I'm going to focus on the affordable housing commitment. And I included in your packet, and if this seems jumbled, I was literally sitting in a training on this that I found out last minute and writing the staff report and begging Ryan Muse to delay sending it out to you because I had more information that I was sitting in the training doing. So I want to illustrate what our baseline affordable housing numbers are according to this program. And they might be a little bit differently than you think. We're going to do a live action of this, which should be fun, hopefully. So the state has provided a tool that you can input parameters such as mortgage rate, interest rate, inflation rate, and they pull all of the census data. Maybe this is going to work for me, maybe not. I'll just go to this guy. Share. So many buttons to remember. Okay. So this is when I went into the baseline tool to put in Glenwood Springs information. So what they're,
There we go.
All right, we had it on one screen.
okay. All right, we're all looking at the same thing. Great. So this is taking into account area median income. We have Garfield County area median income. That's what Glenwood Springs uses. We entered 2022 as the income year. They have some assumptions that are included in this that we have been advised to not alter unless we have a very good reason to do so. So they chose a household size of 3. This has US Census Bureau data for people moving in and moving out. Not going to mess with that one either. Sale unit availability rate is apparently 21%. Inflation rate, and I see Carl has a funny face, so we might be making an argument to change that. Inflation rate is set to 0. What I'm going to give you right now is a worst case scenario, right? Inflation is set to 0. I've moved the mortgage interest rate to 6%. Those with more experience in that, you tell me if that needs to change.
I think we're fine with that.
Mortgage term of 30 years, an assumption of $3,000 in property tax. So all of these things go into the parameters, the assumptions that we're going to pull from our baseline affordable rate. Now, pull up the second one.
Yeah.
Share. Everyone's seeing the same thing? Okay, so these are the results that they pull. Our selected area median income for a household of 3 is 84,000. And as you can see there, our baseline estimate is approximately 1,150 units pulled from census data that are considered affordable by their parameters. And that is the 30% of income at 100% AMI for home ownership and 30% of income at 60% of AMI for rental. And that's a lot of numbers, so ask me if I need to go over that again. So this is the worst case scenario of what our 3% annual affordable housing commitment would look like. At the end of the 3-year cycle, about 104 units. So that's what we're committing to get to. Increasing that number by 104 units by the end of 2025. That's what that means. So obviously, when you change the interest rate and some of those other things, I got to we're hovering in around our commitment of 30 units a year. An important thing to note is that you don't have to do it by year, it's at the end. So you could create 100 units in the first year and then sail on through to 2026 and you're going to meet your goal, or vice versa. So they don't count it until the very end. And I'm going to stop share there. So that's our 3% cost commitment that we would be doing. And I can talk about the affordability rates that kind of falls into. I did include some of the slides on why we're being encouraged to make this commitment, and I can bring those up. That was from the training from DOLA. One of the advantages, if we do commit, we don't have to do this until November 1st. The major advantage of doing this now is we do have quite a few units that are coming down the line that could be counted toward this number. And you need to commit before they're built in order to count them. So if we weren't to commit until November and say something came in with 10 units that meets the criteria, we can't count that anymore. Those 10 units are now in the past. So there's a little bit, they're encouraging that expediency so that we can count those numbers. And also they do point out, though the particulars are still unknown, that funding will become available in July for some of those programs mentioned. So if you put your commitment in, then you can start going after that funding. And then I think the final component that I want to highlight is that our commitment has impacts for every other nonprofit organization within our boundaries of going after this money as well. If we don't commit, then Habitat for Humanity can't apply for a Glenwood project, or anyone, Archdiocese, Feed My Sheep, any of the programs. We are kind of the holder of the authority to go after that money. So we first have to commit to open the doors to everyone else. That's a lot of responsibility, but that's what they chose to go with. So I think I will stop there and throw it out for questions and comments and really how you guys feel about making that commitment. I'd like to get a general direction if not the full commitment tonight, and see where you guys want to go from here with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I guess everything I'm hearing makes me beg the question of why wouldn't we?
Well, if you don't think that we can hit that mark, that has some consequences.
So what is the penalty if we don't hit the mark?
That I can't tell you.
Okay, I thought there was something, in there about not being able to maybe. get
So
some
they have
financing,
a
but-
lot of, if you don't meet it, then you can't apply for the next one. It's, I will be honest, this program being very new, I wouldn't say that it's fully rolled out yet. So there are a lot of things that I have questions on.
Okay,
And I have a question, I can't imagine, I'm thinking, if we commit and we don't hit the baseline, does that put in jeopardy funding that already went out? I can't imagine, the
Right.
project's been built. How are you gonna claw that back?
right.
So I don't
right.
think that that's a feasible penalty. But I'm not entirely certain what they mean. We are making a commitment for that 9%.
Okay, okay.
I don't exactly know what happens if we don't meet it.
Mhm. Okay, I guess. Are we just doing questions or comments right now?
questions.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Hannah, what you mentioned the construction cycle now, and we might have some qualifying units. What's the benchmark for qualifying? Is it a permit, a CO under construction? What makes it qualify between now and November?
I can also not answer that. I was thinking the same thing.
It's
right?
that you won't answer. You can't because
I can't.
DOLA
because,
hasn't told us?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
At
you.
least not in the information I found. It is flying fast. And I just caught that training by the seat of my pants because I noticed an email and they're like, hey, this might have gone to your trash inbox, but there's training in 5
Okay.
minutes. So there's still a lot of information coming out about this. DOLA has partnered with some entities, some well-known affordable housing organizations to roll out this information, so it's forthcoming. I would venture a guess that it's when they're actually created, which in my mind is vertical development, not entitlement, because entitlement, if you get approval for a project, as we've seen in the past, it doesn't mean you're actually going to build it.
Right.
Something a little bit more permanent.
And can you think of an overwhelming reason that we should be thinking of not to proceed?
I did put a small mention in the fiscal impact. I think if we are aggressive and want to achieve that 100 unit, we're gonna have to put in some major work. And that could be financially, that could be, we talked about in the work session today, doing it ourselves, building it ourselves. So 100 units might not sound like a lot, but if you look at how we're getting there with inclusionary zoning, it is very incremental and slower. And we haven't gotten to 100 unit mark in the 3 years, almost now 4 years of inclusionary zoning. So that's not going to do it alone. So it's going to take time, probably some financial commitments or other commitments that Beverly has highlighted. So it's not like we can make the commitment and just kind of sit back. We need to be an active participant in reaching that goal.
And the benchmarks for our area seem extremely low in terms of qualifying. Again, do you think we might have tools to meet those as DOLA lets us know what's going on?
And in the discussions that I've had, I think we've got good tools in place where we're going to be slowly adding for sale, because our inclusionary zoning is at the threshold that they're requiring for sale products. It's 100% area median income. For rent products, that's at 60% area median income. That is nothing that the free market is going to provide. That is strictly a mission-driven organization. That is a low-income housing tax credit application to get to that level of rental. Because you could see the maximum was $1,200 in that slide, and that number doesn't change so much with the parameters that I was including before. So that one we're going to have trouble with. And then if you think about how many for sale products that we've actually had going, we have Habitat for Humanity coming up with a possibility of 8 units on that side. So that's an even slower process.
Okay, thank you, I think. Thank
You're
you.
welcome, I think.
I was just going to mention, but she tossed out there the discussion that we had earlier in the work session.
I think I know the answer to this, but would the workforce housing qualify to meet these numbers?
Mostly no.
That's what I think. too. Yeah.
Workforce housing, as we talk about it, is really around that 100% AMI, 100 to probably now 140. So if it was for sale product, workforce for sale product at 100% AMI, it would, but that rental is much lower. So that's a harder metric for us to reach without some assistance from another organization, or if we want to throw some significant subsidy behind rental assistance, or kind of like Garfield County Housing has federal housing vouchers where we buy down the rent, is a possible idea to get to that, but it's, I would say that aspect is maybe financially heavy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just real quick, how far did we get in 4 years? I know.
You're meaning how many units do we have in our inclusionary zoning program?
Or how many did we add over the past 4 years where you said it wasn't like very fastly?
Over the last 4 years, actually, the last update that I gave, that was me, right? The last update that our department gave you had 45 units that were deed restricted through our voluntary program and our inclusionary housing program. But those are all rental and they're all at an average of 100% AMI, so zero.
Zero. And it's safe to assume that the Habitat for Humanity units will also not count.
Habitat for Humanity will count because they
Okay.
are for sale units at 80% AMI,
80%.
so they're actually below the
So-
threshold.
So if, okay, but yeah,
So
okay.
we could get 8.
Sometime next year.
We did, it's public knowledge on the low income housing tax credits. Their first award was given out. So we do have a project in Glenwood Springs. It will be rental and it will be under, well, not all of it, but it will hit some of that mark. So I would imagine 25 units coming in from that. That's a couple years out, I would imagine, because they haven't come in for their application yet. So they still need to go through the entitlement process.
And the cycle is November to November to November. It's always November, so we have to get the 100 units by 3 years, November.
Yes, that's the final.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Counselor Kaup. Oh, yeah, let me round 2. You're good.
Hannah, so does it only count, do units only count that the city does? Because it sounds like they don't have to be new construction, they can be conversion. So for example, if we have institutions within the community such as higher education or hospital or whoever that are purchasing and converting units for their employees, would those count?
My understanding is yes. So we have that baseline. We are
Okay.
the entity that has to commit, but then any units created during that time, not by us, by anyone. And that's
Okay.
why,
Okay.
that's why
So as
I'm
we-
talking about the nonprofit organizations,
Yeah.
because if they apply for funding, in theory, they're going after creation of the units that would qualify.
Right,
So
Or if
there
we
should
work
be
with-
some movement on that side.
okay. If we work with
Won't be doing it
employers that are,
entirely alone. I'm just speaking to you about what our programs are currently producing, so you have a good idea. If for some reason no one else was able to get funding or do anything, it would be on us.
okay, for example, then say a hotel conversion might qualify if the rents matched.
Our current hotel conversion requirements and incentives would not match. They are too high
Okay,
because they're rental product at 100% AMI. If someone in that program decided to lower their
rent
rents,
for lower, right?
Mhm,
then yes.
mhm.
Okay, great, thank you.
I leaned over to Counselor Dunn and I said, if you wait long enough, all of your questions will be answered. You guys did, you asked very good questions. What about opting out? At any point, can you opt out?
You stumped me.
Yeah, so we're opting in.
Can we opt out?
Can we opt out?
I suppose opting out would just be not meeting our commitment.
Yeah,
And then we'd be removing ourselves and every other entity from receiving further funding available by Prop 223.
and when you say,
thing on
when
that
you
as
say
well.
city limits and you say it has to be within city limits and even other nonprofits are unable to get them if the city doesn't opt in. City limits or 81601
City limits.
Okay.
Garfield County will have to opt in,
for the remainder.
and I think we know how that will go for their jurisdiction.
Okay,
Let's be optimistic.
It's very possible that they could hear my wonderful presentation and think it's a good idea.
They
And they
might-
might have
might offer it.
organizations that are pushing for them to opt in because they have a big area to cover.
yeah,
But I think
Yeah.
most of the development, if I'm being honest, is going to occur within municipal boundaries. So I think in the nonprofit world, they're very interested in getting as many municipalities to opt in
okay.
as possible.
And what are you looking for from for us this evening? Are you wanting us to vote to opt in, or are you wanting us, are you just, this is educational? What are you looking
If
for?
you're comfortable,
Mhm.
I did list this item as an action item possibly, if you
Okay.
guys got there. So it would be being comfortable with that commitment and also being comfortable without knowing all of the answers.
Yeah.
You have time. Funding is going to be coming out in July, so they're encouraging early. So if you need more information, we can certainly continue this conversation. I wanted to get it in front of you so you can start thinking about it.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that.
But if you're ready, let's
Ca-
go.
We've got two counselors still wanting to make comments. Counselor Zelinski.
So I just was curious if you've had, I know this is like kind of sprung on you, but if you had opportunity to talk to any of the other kind of neighboring municipalities to see, what their kind of thoughts are on this and, because I think if there was kind of a similar mindset and a joint effort, then I think we probably have more opportunities in the community where development would occur. But I didn't know if
I
that
think that's
conversation
an
had
excellent
happened.
question for our legal attorney who works with multiple other municipalities.
Mr. Legal Attorney, could you
Yeah,
answer that?
I think at this point, Hannah found out, I think like 24 hours before the training, that there was training. Most of my other jurisdictions didn't even find that out, so I forwarded the information. They're really not yet in a position to even be thinking about it. I know that Silverthorne and Avon it's starting to come on the radar, that they need to be looking at it. I know Silverthorne in particular. I don't know that anybody has made a decision yet. I think the piece that worries me the most about this is getting cut off from, everybody getting cut off from funding.
Mhm.
I guess I have a little bit of a, maybe we just need to opt in and we try to fix it as we move along, because there are some things like we've had a lot of discussions around AMI.
Mhm.
And whether that number works here or not in the mountain communities. We may have some opportunities to try to tweak this, but if we're not at the table, then we don't.
So
I think
that,
what I
yeah,
heard Carl say is Hannah is ahead of the curve.
yeah. Well, and I was
And it
actually
was-
about to
yeah, it
commend
was-
you. 'Cause
yeah,
I was like,
gonna
good
say,
job
Hannah
getting on
Hannah
that.
is ahead of the curve.
For the
and She
record.
reads her emails on late Thursday.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Counselor Zelinski, anything else?
it segued me into something else that it's already like skipped my mind, so I apologize.
Counselor Weimer. Whoops, hold on one second.
I did hear that Hannah was ahead of the curve. I did
Mhm,
hear that
mhm.
too. The question, I guess, to clarify, when we say that if we don't apply for these funds, we are preventing nonprofits from also applying to these funds. We are talking specifically 1, 2, 3 funds. And if we don't apply for this, or if we opt out at some point, there are still the historic baseline funds still available for nonprofits to apply for.
So, and we're not yet to the point where we're applying for funds. The commitment is the first step. You have to first
Correct.
commit
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then you can apply for funds. And entities in our jurisdiction can't apply for funds until we commit.
Right.
I'm not quite sure, I guess, to Ingrid, Mayor Russo's point of if we opt out, what does that mean for the other entities?
Mhm.
I again, don't have the answer to that question, but I have a feeling that the state is not going to roll back or somehow try to claw back
Yeah.
funds that were already issued. But we
Right.
certainly wouldn't be for ourselves and any entity allowing them to apply for future funds.
But it wouldn't, at the same time, it wouldn't prevent Habitat for Humanity from being able to do any project in town. It would just prevent them from going after Prop
Yes,
123.
it's access to these $290 million.
Yes.
That's the carrot.
Yes.
Everyone else can operate as usual with the normal grants we go for and other opportunities. Just this money
Correct.
is tied to this commitment.
Thank you.
Counselor Schachter.
Thank you. I may be directing this more to our city manager, Dr. Marshall, or both of you. I'm enthused that we got this passed and there's a boatload of money. And we're gonna be a small player competing against the big players for it like crazy. And as Hannah, as our director has pointed out, there's still so many moving parts. My question, if we decide to go forward with this, and I understand opt-in may not have a lot of consequences yet, but do we have the internal resources to do this as we are staffed? We're doing so much with housing and development already. We're pursuing a variety of plans and options. Is this worth the carrot, given our internal capabilities?
Yes, it most definitely is worth it. As Hannah mentioned, what we might get locked out of is, I think, more troublesome than the effort, at least at this point, to opt in. And I think there could be some unintended consequences that we don't see down the road a bit if we aren't opt-in. The other thing is, I know there is some legislation out there right now where they're trying to say that the AMI changes for the mountain communities, and CAST is working on that, which could make it even easier. And I think if we opt in and we, as Carl said it, and we're saying we're going to be at the table having those conversations and talking about how difficult it is to hit these marks without adjusting that, I think that comes across a little bit better if we've already opted in. And then I think the other is a lot of the effort that the city's already done and is committed to doing, like 2C. I think all of that is moving toward getting there. And I think the funding that we might get would make it worth our while.
Hold on one second. So I'm gonna let Counselor Kaup ask one last question. Then we are gonna open it up for questions or comments from the public. And then we'll bring it back to council for a motion if there's one. Counselor Kaup.
I will wait because I thought we were in comments, and
Okay.
I will wait, and I
Okay,
was
great.
going to make a motion.
Yep. So we'll go ahead and see if anybody here wants to make any comments, and then we'll check and see if there's anyone on the line who would like to make comments. Okay, doesn't look like anyone in the public. Yep, exactly. I'm very aware that Counselor Godus is on. He is ready to make a comment. We'll add him. We'll give him, let's just give him let's give him a minute and a half. No, just kidding. Okay. Oh, I don't know how to, okay.
Is it me? Sorry, am I up, guys?
Okay, hold on one second.
We're raising your volume, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Oh, no one's ever needed to do that before.
He said no one's ever had to do that before.
Yeah, we know. Okay. I
Just
will
let me know
add
when you're ready.
committed civic servant who's on vacation in Indonesia who calls in to make comments. Thank you, Counselor Godus.
It's okay. So are we ready for my comments?
Give us just a second more. And I thank everyone for your patience.
Just ask him to talk loud.
We could just ask him to talk loud.
Can you hear me if I talk loud?
There it is. Okay. Okay, that's gonna come on loud. Mhm. Okay, go ahead and try again, Jonathan.
Okay, this is a normal tone. How is this?
Mm-mm.
Do you need louder?
1 second, Jonathan. It's actually coming from the back room. We have
Oh.
this issue with planning and zoning. And I actually used my cell phone to call the person and then held the phone.
Oh,
I don't know if that will work in Indonesia.
okay.
but
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna work.
I don't know if I can do those long distance rates. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is how you ask for a raise.
It's a city phone, so Beverly.
I don't think we bought that plan.
Okay, you have about 10 seconds more and we may just have you send like a voice text to one of he's gonna let it go. I think you're gonna let it go. Are you wanting us to opt in?
Yes.
Are you wanting us to opt in? Oh,
Yes.
okay, okay, awesome. Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, yeah, yeah, perfect. Okay, we'll bring it back to council. Thank you so much for trying, everyone. Back to council for Counselor Kemp.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that council directs staff to draft a commitment letter to increase affordable housing in compliance with Proposition 123 for the city of Glenwood Springs. And that we work, I guess, that we work on that, file a commitment specifying how we will increase a combination of newly constructed units or conversion of existing units. Is that enough of a motion, Carl?
Yes.
I'd like to second that motion.
Great. It is moved by Counselor Kaup and a second by Counselor Zelinski. Let's go ahead and do a vote. I don't think we need a discussion, do we? Okay. Great.
It passes unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, just keep hanging out. Okay, we're gonna move. We're moving on to item number 13. This is ordinance 2023-10, code amendments to title 070, including sections 070, 040, 080, 070, 040, 090, related to site and building design. This is a discussion and or an action to approve this.
Madam Mayor, I was just gonna double check on how many people in the audience are here for the next item on the overlay. I was wondering if we might want to take.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so if everyone is like, okay with it, we're gonna flip flop 13 and 14, and we're going to hold off on the building design. And we're gonna move on to ordinance 2023-09 downtown design overlay. And this would be a first reading.
I'm going to be joined by someone. And I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. So that I'm ready for the rest of the evening. And I'm going to give you in the capable hands of Danielle.
Can I pull up your question?
Sorry.
Good evening, Danielle Campbell, Economic Development Specialist, here to do the first reading on Downtown Commercial Overlay District. I do just have a really quick, brief presentation to give us more time for discussion. But I do really want to talk, really where we've been, and how we got here. This has been a conversation for a long time. Originally started with a recommendation from 2021, with the full intent to create that vibrancy in downtown. And specifically, focusing on what are the types of businesses that give us that vibrancy. And so that's really where this came from. and the time period of where we've been talking about this for a couple of years now. Council has had 2 work sessions in 2022, and then a lot of conversations in 2023, including a public meeting in April, as well as our last work session and council meeting discussing this earlier this month. Based upon that June meeting, we've had a lot of conversations on what I want to talk about first, which is the boundary, and then getting into that overall big picture. So within this boundary, we have 2 specific items, which is inner boundary as well as the outer boundary. So we can focus on that green area. The inner boundary has a lot more to do with that vibrancy, and then the outer boundary includes professional and personal services. So what I want to focus on again in that bigger picture is what we've always talked about within this intent. The intent is to create that vibrancy and street life activation and pedestrian friendly businesses. So what that looks like, and that's why I wanted to break this out again, just to give reference of where the boundary is. So I want to focus on that inner boundary. So what we're thinking through specifically that has made changes from the last conversation in June is where we have a minimum requirement of 50% of ground floor that would have this requirement of uses. For the inner boundary, this would specifically include food and beverage, retail, recreation, and entertainment indoor, personal services, specifically only the personal services that are barbershops, shoe repairs, spas, massages, and personal grooming. On the outer boundary, that would include everything in the inner boundary, but on the ground floor would also include all of the personal services as well as the professional offices. So that's just want to clarify again, just going through this outer and inner of how that shift and how that 50% will change. So, and this is very similar from the previous conversation, is parking areas are 100% in the rear of the building, very similar to what we've been talking about for the past couple of months at this point. But that's really the big picture. Again, the main difference is what those specific inner and outer look like, as well as the expansion and the 50% of the required on the frontage with a primary entrance of these uses. So just to give an idea of what this implementation will look like. So I have up here, I just pulled this from our streets view is H Street and Grand. And so how this would really look like is on the purple is the parcel. And so let's say if any of these were to shift uses as of right now, the overlay implementation is that hatched area, and that would be the 50% of the parcel. So that's how when we're thinking about if this were to happen, how would this be implemented and how would this change? It would be this. This would be the requirement. And so one of the more important things that I do want to highlight specifically on a corner lot, because that really has 2 frontages, right? And so within that, you can kind of see how that hatch would get pulled back. So really a lot like that would have 2 different options there. So just wanted to reemphasize of what that could look like when we're looking at the ground. Obviously it's a map, so it's a little bit hard to visualize, but hopefully the idea of that, how that square footage would be implemented. So just to talk about exemptions based upon council's feedback earlier, our last council meeting is what will not apply to this overlay. That would be parks and open space, deed restricted housing units. And the third is any structure that would, say a fire were to happen. And so a house burns down, obviously horrible. And if someone were to restore it, it would be restored back. And that would not be considered as part of this overlay. The next thing that we talked a lot about is shifting us 2 specific things here when we're talking about thresholds of applicability is again, what gets triggered? How do we move forward with this overlay? So really I want to break down each one of these. The first one being non-residential or mixed use. So something that is currently commercial right now on the ground floor. If a building comes in that it is being remodeled of over 25%, this would get triggered. The second thing I want to focus on is residential only. And a lot of conversation of how do we make sure that we're still preserving that residential? So that has been pulled out. So what this looks like is if it's currently residential on the ground floor, unless something is getting remodeled by over 80%, which oftentimes that's mostly like a scrape or something like that, this would get triggered. The things that have always stayed consistent is a change of use application. So that's if something is currently a retail establishment that gets changed into an office, that would trigger a change of use application through community development, and this would get triggered. And then the final thing is, development on vacant land. So the two items that I really want to highlight here, specifically with discussion, just to make sure staff heard you guys correctly during the last council meeting, is one, focusing on the inner boundary and the personal uses. So professional services offer a lot more than what's listed here, like we talked about earlier. So again, I want to highlight beauty parlor shops, shoe repair, spas and massage, and personal grooming. So the personal grooming, I do want to mention, also includes tattoo parlors. So based upon the public comment we've received, that has not been exactly the use people want to see. So I want to bring up that this is the right language we want to move forward with within the inner boundary. The next item that I want to make sure that we heard you guys right is the outer boundary, specifically on professional services. So the ones on the slide would be the allowed use on the ground floor. And a lot of conversations we've had specifically around government office and financial institutions, just making sure that that is something that we want to see in that outer. So I won't go too far into this because I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the proposed language, but I do quickly want to talk about the staff recommendation. So a couple of things whenever it comes to the staff recommendation is we have two items that we want for council to consider. One being the outer boundary. So the outer boundary, staff has recommended, I know it's really, really small, but from currently the outer boundary goes all the way to 13th Street. Staff has recommended to push that to 11th. And the really reason why is because a lot of those uses are currently auto-oriented if they are commercial. So we're a little concerned on how that would play out when we're talking about redevelopment of that area. The second thing I want to focus on is the inner boundary, which a lot of things specifically on 6th Street, since that area is not in the GID, parking is required. So if we can remember in the GID, which is in that south portion below the highway, is parking isn't really required for any of these type of uses. So in the north portion, when you're thinking about this stuff, is that a lot of the uses we want to see, it's very, very difficult or impossible for these uses to come in. So that's where we'd want to just have that conversation with you to make sure that this is possible. Anything you want to add?
We can talk about the parking, but what Danielle is pulling me up to talk about is community development has received applications for businesses on that north side that haven't panned out because parking is a very challenging aspect to get to in that requirement. So we're just calling out when we talked last time about incentives and how council can package this regulatory piece with how to incent the businesses that you want there. Parking is a consideration, and we can talk about that in your discussion. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah.
So I will go ahead and bring it back up to the proposed code language, but that is all I have for the presentation. Again, just to reemphasize on kind of what we want to make sure we heard on is the right uses in both the inner and outer boundary, as well as considering of staff recommendation to shrink up that outer and the parking concerns. Thank you.
Bring it back to council. Anybody have questions? Counselor Cow.
Just a quick question, Danielle. On when you say approved uses, just a technicality on the wording, it says must be on the ground floor and 50% of the ground floor area. Do you mean a minimum of 50%? And if so, can we add that wording in just so it's clear? Just minimum of 50%.
Certainly. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then my other question would be, from what you guys brought up, I do agree with your staff recommendation to move that boundary up to 11th. But also part of that consideration is this parking consideration. Do you have recommendations for North Glenwood? how do we get there? Because it's not in the GID. You know, we've talked for years about changing the GID a little bit, so maybe it generates more income, but, yeah,
Excellent question.
okay, great.
Thank you. Take this one. Okay. So our code currently does have a parking fee in lieu. It is $8,000 and change per space. So if you're a business that wants to locate, say, on 6th Street, and you need 10 spaces and you have 9, you can pay the city $8,000 for that lack of parking space.
Okay.
So we do have a parking fee in lieu. A lot of businesses that are locating over there have found that that's just not feasible for their financials. So we haven't had many people taking up that offer. You know, it is a consideration of if the GID concept of waiving parking or maybe some type of reduction in parking, because it will be challenging for the retail and the uses identified to locate in that area. So it may be, you know, with required parking and the regulation here, it may be overly burdensome to actually get the uses you want. So we would need to think about creative ways to possibly solve that problem. It's us thinking ahead. I'm not 100% certain that that will happen, but just reviewing the uses that we've had come in and the very creative ways staff has tried to get the uses that are over there now,
Right.
it'll be a challenge.
Okay, just as a concept, if we were able to get some kind of a downtown circulator that, you know, serve those areas and the main tourist attractions, and would that be part of an incentive package possibly, or a nexus to say we could do reduced parking in that area?
I think it would be more on that second part that you mentioned. It would be a reason to state why maybe we can reduce the parking or implement something like the GID has because that circulator exists. But I know, you know, this topic is challenging in the idea of possibly expanding the GID, which has a lot of components to it. But I think we need to get creative. If there's some component you guys want to talk about of a parking reduction or not, this is just something that we're bringing up as a challenge that could become more challenging with this application.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Dem.
Thank you. Just quick question. Obviously expanding the GID takes a vote of the people because it's a tax district. No?
It's actually more of a petition to come in. I'd have to take a look at,
Okay.
I think if you wanted to, and you know, if you wanted to push it out to properties that weren't already requesting to be in, that would take a vote. So if a property, like you'll recall that we had some properties move in and out on the petition downtown, it's because those property owners were asking to be in. As opposed
I
to the
see.
city just saying, we're going to expand the boundaries.
Sure.
That would
Okay.
require a vote of those those properties to be included.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And I'll just add that before we jump into a discussion about including the just expanding the GID district, to your point, we need to know the nuances of it because there's a lot of other variables that we would also be adopting, not just as a reduction to parking. So there may be another vehicle, pardon the pun, to make it so to not have to park. Counselor Schechter.
Sure. Well, related to that, and I don't recall where we are in our final 6th Street design. Forgive me, I'm not sure. But given that the desire might be to enhance business and reduce the parking stress, is there a way to look at how we're designing 6th Street if we haven't already finalized it to increase street parking and still keep our pet and biking? I'm not sure how we have in line. It's just a question. Related to that, also regarding the 80% residential change. If we had in this district a residence that got scraped with the desire to put in a duplex, we wouldn't be able to do that. Is that, or would we be able to apply for special use in that case, since we are trying to encourage residential in that core as well? So how would that be handled, perhaps?
So for something to that extent, so if using your example of a residential is scraped, and then if someone were to propose, let's say a duplex, if it doesn't fall into that, strict affordability that we have identified as well, then it would have to get a special use permit.
Okay. And then the other question, and maybe more question than answer. You mentioned, I don't know the exact quote, but the exceptions that exceptions would apply with 100% AMI. Flesh that out exactly what that says,
I will
Or-
leave that to.
because I have a question related to that.
Did you say deed restricted?
Okay.
I'm here.
All right, so, okay, so the exemption, so given what we've just been talking about prior on 123, without a major change in our entire code, at least for this zone, should we consider a lower threshold than 100% to, since we've been talking about 80 and lower, and without changing the whole code, but as we consider this overlay district, since 100% doesn't, it helps us compared to what we have now, but it doesn't help us meet some of our low income goals. Just a thought.
So that's a great thought. I would say we set it at 100% area median income because that is what all the city programs are currently
right.
set at. You have a good point that it's not going to get us closer on that commitment. But it is 100% area median income at or below. So someone can come in with the 60% golden unicorn property. And it would still be exempt from this, so it's still protected. I wouldn't want to lower it below. I understand what you're saying. You trapped me.
Just a question, that's
Yeah,
all.
I want to allow that workforce attainable product as well, because I feel like that's much easier. Well, that's easier to get. And so I wouldn't want to drop it down to 60% because, as I've mentioned in the previous presentation, we can't achieve that. So that's solely out of our control with heavy subsidies from someone else or incredible subsidies from us. But I get your point.
Thank you.
Counselor Dunn,
Thank you.
hold on one second. Okay.
One more quick question. So we have an inner boundary, we have an outer boundary. One is green and one is yellow, on my map at least.
Mhm.
Crazy thought, if we get rid of the parking in the yellow, parking requirements in the yellow, is that crazy? Or would that help? Would that help the businesses up north? Would that help downtown?
That is a innovative idea. It will certainly help businesses that are looking to locate there now. It could have other implications that staff has not looked at for exempting the parking in that.
As parking moves outward.
Yeah.
Right, so that's, I mean, that's what the GID the same, parking just moves outward.
I'm going to jump in really quickly and ask that instead of just eliminating it, could we find a middle ground and say that you could apply for a variance or a special use, but whatever the tool is, so that we would have an opportunity with internally to review it?
The crazy idea that just popped into my head, so take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
We do have a section of our code that allows for alternative equivalent compliance in our parking standards.
Okay.
So currently you can request up to a 30% reduction of your required parking. Perhaps you could write, and I'm looking at Carl for a nod to see how crazy this is. Perhaps we could write in something that states that in this boundary, you could apply for up to 50% reduction.
Or even 30?
I was gonna say you can write anything.
Yeah, yeah, we like that.
So crazy
Right,
idea, right? back.
You know, there's no, I don't see any, I mean, it's a policy choice for
Mhm.
you guys, like what that level is.
Yeah.
That may be actually kind of a nice middle ground. And she's doing this to me because I did this to her before the planning commission, meeting, just so you know, it's a
Mhm.
little quid pro quo on crazy ideas. So,
Yeah.
so I think that I do think that makes sense. Something we do know, I will, because we had a brief conversation before the meeting and I was extolling the virtues of that the parking fee should be closer to like 40 grand, because that's what it takes us
Hmm.
to actually build a space.
Mhm.
So just recognize that you you collectively as the city are taking on the responsibility for creating that parking because the demand is going to continue to be there. So whatever that number is that you're reduced to, is 8,000 the right number? I don't know, but just things to think about.
It's interesting because the ultimate goal of the overlay zoning and the kind of the impetus behind this is to encourage vitality in this downtown core. And when I come in and I hear that there were businesses that applied to be in our community, and because of this parking requirement, they were unsuccessful in becoming part of the business community. Not only does it seem as though an overlay zoning is satisfying our goal of, maybe shaping or maybe massaging a little bit what type of businesses get that are allowed in the downtown core, but this also kind of actually is a secondary measure to really support economic growth and new businesses in the downtown core. So I would be supportive of that. What a quiet council. I think, well, let's go ahead. I will. Yeah, we'll let Counselor Dime say one more comment and then we will turn it, our question, and then we will turn it to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, okay, a couple of things. The special use aspect of this whole thing, or the special use avenue. If you think your current use is the best use there is to whatever reason, you have the right to come in front of P&Z and then us to apply that should be the use that you want to have. That's what that avenue does, right?
So just a clarification, yes, we included a special use component. So what it states is anything that was allowed in the base zoning district, because this is an overlay. So the base zoning district that we have now, anything allowed in our table of uses that is not allowed by this overlay, you can come in and apply for a special use permit. I will remind council that is approved at the Planning and Zoning Commission level, so you would not see it.
Okay, but I guess my point was if there is an avenue,
I just wanted to make sure.
I got
you
it.
knew Your powers.
I got it. It's fine. It's not a
Yes.
problem.
There is an avenue, so
There's an avenue.
if this overlay.
There's a process.
Yes, if this overlay prohibits you from doing what you want to do and it's an allowed use in the base zoning as it currently exists, you can apply for a special use permit and based on the criteria in our code, make an argument to Planning and Zoning Commission that it is an appropriate use based on the criteria listed there.
Okay, historical, whatever.
Okay.
And the other thing is, just real quick, the 25% that triggers this. I could see that if I were to, I don't know, change a few walls, change some doors and add a bathroom or something, I'm at 25% rather quickly. Have you guys thought about a different threshold? Something a little more, I wouldn't say lenient, I would just say a little more flexible, that people actually could undertake remodeling without pulling this, without triggering this?
We have explored those different levels of threshold and it gets back to what we've talked about and Beverly mentioned before. How quickly do you want this to change? So we do have quite a few remodels that happen in this 20, 25, even 30% range, that if it was higher, you'd miss out on that opportunity for it to turn over into what you're desiring. But definitely open to different thresholds that you guys are comfortable with. We have a lot of different thresholds like this for renovation within our code that are different from this. 50% is also another one that's been out there in different sections. So staff is comfortable implementing whatever threshold you are comfortable with, as well as the community.
How did we come up with the 25%? Do you recall that?
My brilliant brain. No.
I figured it was you.
Sorry, let me be real here. It was actually kind of a review of those other components in our code that I mentioned. Of how we handle thresholds in other, like when open space is required, when you have to do landscaping, when design comes into effect. There are varying levels within our code. And so we kind of, given council's direction of wanting change, we brought that down to a lower-ish level as a threshold.
And you said 25 to 30 is what you've seen?
Those are more populous renovations that we see in this area. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Counselor Weimer.
So a question that just now has occurred to me, and it's kind of silly. I could have asked this a long time ago, I think. What is the intention of an overlay? What does an overlay do? What are we trying to accomplish with an overlay versus changing the zone? What's the difference?
The overlay just operates to occur much faster across all zone districts rather than going zone district by zone district and
Okay.
doing sort of line by line changes to each one of those zone district regulations.
So we are changing, these are,
This is essentially a zoning overlay.
okay.
So
I was also
it's
thinking
applying
an
across.
overlay. Do you lift it off at some point? But it doesn't
You
sound
certainly, I mean, you certainly could.
Okay.
Absolutely. But it really is just because with an overlay, it's a broader based implementation across multiple zone districts in a given area.
Okay, okay.
Counselor Zelinski.
So to kind of go back to that 25%, would there be, say that you wanted to make a renovation because of the size of the building, it's insignificant. You know, if a big building, 25% is a significant evolution. If it's a smaller space, 25% is a smaller evolution. Is there an avenue to get a variance or get a special use or get an exception? Like, would you go before P and Z, or is that something that's embedded in there?
I might need Carl's help on this one. Variance applications are very specific. They're not allowed for uses. You can't get a variance from a use. So I'm not exactly sure how a variance would.
Yeah, I actually don't think that would be the mechanism, but I understand what you're saying. And so if we have a 5,000 square foot building, if I'm doing a few doors in a bathroom, I've hit 25% almost instantly. If I have a 50,000 square foot building doing that same renovation, probably not as significant. I think if council's inclined to kind of take a look at that, we'd probably want to, between first and second reading, look at actually some square footage breaks where those different percentages kicked in on what you're actually renovating on that ground floor. I think that's probably where we'd be, because I'd prefer to have a set standard than to have this variance criteria that kind of a new process.
It just kind of burdens staff with like a bunch of different applications. Yeah, my intent in that is I want to create, like Ingrid said, or Mayor Wusso said, more vibrancy, more opportunity, and reducing barriers to I think that would be something to just keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think we're going to hear some testimony from a building I know well that could use some renovations. And they just would like to do those.
Right.
And it's going to would potentially trigger an event here that would be tough on a long-standing, it's been a law office for a very long time. It was a livery stable, then it was a law office. So, thinking our way through, like, maybe that is the thing,
Yeah.
is a square footage, something in there. Maybe it could be tied to bringing yourselves into ADA compliance. That might be another criteria that would not trigger the requirement, because if you're really trying to just make your building more accessible, meet current
Yeah.
codes, maybe that's an exception that we should have in there. So I think these are good conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah,
Thank
thank you. Counselor Sachter. Dude. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, Hannah, I don't recall. Did we ultimately deal with a form of density bonus and upper level recessed in the downtown core, permitting increased height as long as it's recessed from the front face by a certain amount?
Currently, the only density bonus we have is attached to projects with inclusionary zoning units.
Okay, so we haven't, we
No.
discussed it for ages. We haven't
We
done
have.
that.
Yes.
And so again, if this came up again through P and Z, it says one of the desires in this overlay district in our historic downtown is to add height, but with reasonable setbacks. Will this prohibit it? Can it enhance it? Do we know if it can still occur with this ordinance?
So I will point out, outside of a density bonus, the downtown area does have a 60-foot by special review use allowance that is tailored to our downtown area. So they can go higher than most other places with
So-
special use review.
So it may not affect that goal if we pass this as
I don't
is.
believe so. no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are going to, oh, go ahead.
Yeah. This is just leading into what you're going to open up. I think we just wanted to mention from community development, since the last time we talked with you guys, we have received considerable public comment,
Mhm.
of course. And so just wanted to take that. In fact, I know some of the people that we spoke to are here tonight, but there are others that may be online
Okay.
to speak to it, but also came in and took considerable time in Comm Dev department to talk through this and have concerns. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that in this last 2 weeks, we have received renewed interest in what this means for people. So just take that into consideration.
Before we have public comment, and just for the sake of not having a lot of outlying questions, do you feel, and do we all kind of feel like the dialogue has answered the question of if you want a variance or you want a special use, whether or not it's going to be allowed and what the process is? Do you feel like we've kind of covered that? Because I think that might answer the question for a lot of people.
We have covered that in
Okay.
our individual conversations with people that have
Okay.
come in.
Yep.
But it would probably be good to just reiterate with people what the
Yeah.
special use process means for people.
Yeah.
So we can elaborate after public comment if you want.
Okay.
Further.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, perfect. We'll go ahead and open it to public comment. As a reminder, I don't think we have a list started, but for those of you who are here to speak, we'll do one at a time. Come up, you get 3 minutes. We need your name and if you're in city limits. Greg Grippy.
Hi, Greg Rippey, 213 Creekside Court, representing the ownership group of 817 Colorado, the Alpine Professional Building. It's good that I can talk before attorneys because then they can correct anything that I misstated. But I think it's, first of all, I understand your goals. Second of all, the 800 block of Colorado should not be included. It should be a green area. Why are there a lot of professional businesses there? Because it's close to the courthouse. That's why we have attorneys there. That's why we have in the past title companies. That's why we have mortgage companies there, because it's very useful.
Mhm.
So, and second of all, I'd like to apologize because I'm the guy I never wanted to be, in that you've had public hearings and I didn't know about it. I didn't show up. I'm the guy that comes kind of at the last moment, and I apologize for that in advance. But the triggering event is really problematic for our building in particular. It's 3 stories. So 25%, 4 years ago, we totally renovated the 3rd floor. We did that to make it more attractive to tenants. Next up is the 2nd floor. So if we go into a triggering event, and I don't think special use is acceptable in that you don't know, why should we have to go through another process for as long as we've been there? So the other thing that is problematic, if it were to be triggered, is that all parking has to be in the rear of property. Well, there's no rear of the property for us other than a dumpster and 1 parking space. So what would you do if you did that? You would take away a number of parking spaces that exist right now in downtown Glenwood and make them go somewhere else because something else would have to happen. The other part of the triggering, that 50% of the ground floor would then be necessary to be retail or the uses that have been described. I've been in my office 35 years and I'd have to move. So I think you've got a problem with the triggering language, what the percentage is. And I would encourage you to take a look at that block in particular and say, you know, maybe it should be green instead of yellow. And since I'm talking about that block, can we please get some striping on the most traveled street in Glenwood? And it's a rafter route. And while I say I understand what you're trying to do and the pedestrian friendly and talking about upgrading alleys and stuff, you're never going to be real pedestrian friendly when you're the designated rafter route from 8th Street up to Grand Avenue. Unless we want to get RAFT in here and say they've got to come up with a different route, which I'd be fine with because my truck was hit by a rafter bus while it was legally parked. And and you doubled my parking fines. Which I found out after you started your code enforcement a little more vigorously. And so I have been contributing to the city coffers. Madam Mayor, Council, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Greg. Okay. Any others who would like to make public comment? Okay.
Hi, Warren Swanson, speaking as a 21-year resident of Glenwood Springs and the president and of SGM Engineers. We're located at 118 West 6th Street, which is basically the building between the Village Inn and the La Quinta now on 6th Street. My first concern, just as a resident and the ordinance maybe having unintended consequences, is professional service firms downtown employ a lot of people who are patronizing the vibrant business community that we want to build during a lot of the times of day, a lot of the days of the week, and a lot of the weeks of the year when the tourist traffic isn't so heavy. And so it's a very complementary source of business, in my opinion. I know firsthand that our office of over 70 professionals partakes in countless breakfasts, lunches, lunch meetings, reserved spaces at the Hotel Colorado, and goes to happy hours and because of our location. And so if we had to move on account of this ordinance, I'm encouraged to hear about some of the maybe alternative pathways that may be available. A lot of that would go away. You know, why would an ordinance like this pressure us to move? Well, there's not many buildings, professional office buildings of the size necessary for SGM within Glenwood Springs. Also, we can't afford to give up 50% of our ground floor to an alternative use and still, you know, have a building that's big enough in our current location. I would also agree with Mr. Rippey about the triggering remodel percentage. There's just a lot of 2-floor and 3-floor buildings in Glenwood. Not many, you know, that are taller than that. And being able to remodel a floor of a 3-floor building in order to reduce the impact on just operations is really helpful. So I'd really suggest something that gets more into that range where the occupant would really be considering a move, you know, or a change of building versus doing the remodel. I think that's pretty fair. I guess also I'd like to just speak to where our building is and the ability to achieve kind of the character of neighborhood that I think you're trying to achieve. We were wedged right in there between a busy, complex roundabout, a highway interchange, an on-ramp that generates unbelievable noise during you know, the hours in the afternoon. And so
I'm gonna cut you off. You've got 3 minutes. I'm so sorry. And
All right.
I truly appreciate the feedback.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, Chris Geiger, 1063 Park West Drive, Ward 5, managing member of 818 Colorado LLC, which owns the office building at 818 Colorado within Zone M2. I appreciate support and efforts in making downtown more vibrant, but I request that you not adopt this ordinance. As Mr. Rippey indicated, Colorado's 800 block currently and historically is a professional service district, and it is dependent on its proximity to local government. The particular property that we own has been a professional office since 1972. This ordinance will directly and extraordinarily impact 818 Colorado, disproportionate to other properties in the proposed overlay. The staff report describes elements of this ordinance as an aggressive measure to fundamentally change the character of the overlay zone. It will eliminate dozens of permitted uses and economically injure property owners. And I kind of believe the city is considering this action without adequate economic analysis or process. On the process side, until, well, at least as recently as February 2nd, the proposed overlay map only included portions of Grand and Cooper and 6th. And those are areas that are historically retail-oriented areas. And that map was out there for several years, and I think people kind of came to expect that's where we were headed, and I believe that the DDA endorsed that concept. It wasn't until your June 1st work session when we really first became aware that we were talking about a much larger area. There were 2 short presentations on April 26th. It appears they were attended by 25 people, of which 7 were in favor of the extensive overlay zone and 11 were opposed to it, and no comments from the missing 8 or 7 out of the 25. And I don't know that those 2 short presentations were adequate to put the public on notice of what we're talking about. You know, we've got a project going on Blake Street, and we're giving people 2 weeks to submit comments on that, and their underlying property uses aren't going to be affected by it. You know, at your April 23rd work session, there was some discussion regarding an economic analysis before proceeding, but there's no economic analysis that we've seen. We don't know how many of these preferred 7 uses the city can sustain, or what's going to happen to all the businesses that are going to be displaced. The staff report just predicts that there's no economic benefit from this proposal. Nevertheless, on June 1st, somewhat arbitrarily or seemingly arbitrarily, we selected the most extensive restricted proposed zoning overlay. I know the ordinance expresses a concern for demonstrated community concern in the downtown, but I'm not sure that that's broadly shared, and I don't believe that it necessarily extends to the entire overlay district. At 818 Colorado, more than 33 general M2 zone uses are going to be written out by this ordinance, leaving only 7 specific but already permitted uses. So the ordinance doesn't create economic opportunities, it simply takes them away.
Thank
And
you,
I'm-
Chris. I appreciate it.
Madam Mayor, councilors, my name is Scott Grosskopf. I'm an attorney with Balcom and Green. Balcom and Green has been in the community in downtown for over 70 years. In the last 50 years, we've been housed over at the Livery Building. We occupy the first floor. We employ 10 to 20 different employees, staff, attorneys, who come and shop and work and eat and go out and visit downtown. We have our clients who also come and visit us and then take opportunities and go visit downtown and spend money and do their activities. We chose that building due to its proximity to the courthouse because of the professional corridor that is served there. I'm here to ask that council not adopt this ordinance in the form that it is. What it has the effect of doing is pushing professional organizations like ours, like SGM, like Mr. Rippey's, out of the downtown core. Who's realtors who often have that front shop window on the first floor, they're no longer allowed to be in this zone overlay area. Healthcare providers, accountants, engineers, other professional services. We're very concerned about some of the unintended consequences that this may have in this of this proposal. We've already talked a little bit about what happens if we do a tenant remodel, create the ADA compliance, do new lighting, or what if in our building we renovate the basement? What happens then? And then that means that the whole lawyer's office has to be removed. That doesn't seem right. It's unclear exactly how this the parking provision applies, and then also how that relates with the GID district as well. Is there inconsistencies with the code as it applies to the GID and this new parking proposal? 3 minutes is not quite enough time to talk on this, but I guess one other thing that, from a legal standpoint, concerned perhaps that this does result in some sort of inverse condemnation, not finding the rational nexus between limiting the business and how that promotes vibrancy. None of the businesses that are currently proposed in this overlay zone are on Colorado Ave. So it'd be a drastic change. Also concerned that some of this proposal is actually contrary to all the strategies identified in the comp plan that is listed in the ordinance. Moves businesses like ours out of downtown, locals would not continue to use the downtown core. We'd have to go to the other lawyers and accountants that are outside of downtown. I don't know if it revitalizes the community, but actually potentially has the potential to sterilize certain properties. I don't think 818 would remodel if this were a condition. As far as tourism, our business draws locals. as
Thank
well.
you so much. Sorry to cut you off.
Oh, and one other thing, I'm
Uh,
authorized to speak on behalf of the Hot Springs Lodge and Pool.
oh,
It says-
and I'm sorry, I gave you 3 minutes.
I-
Yeah, but I do appreciate it. I think, well, I'll bring it back to council, but and then I'll actually see if there's anybody online before we, in the public comment. Is there anyone else in the audience tonight that wants to speak? No, okay. Is there anyone online that would like to speak? Okay. So then I really will bring it back to council and say that I appreciate your comments. It's, when we come up with these ideas, that's why we're looking for public comment. That's why we make these forums for people to come to us and kind of process and digest all this stuff. So regardless if you were unable to come to those earlier meetings, I do appreciate you coming to these. And I appreciate the feedback you guys have given us. So back to Hannah for a moment.
Thank you. And thank you for coming, Mr. Iffy. Whenever you provide comments, we'll take them.
Yeah.
Last hour or not, exactly as
Mhm.
Mayor Russo said.
Yeah.
I would like to address something that was brought up, and so I really appreciate these comments because sometimes it triggers things for staff in our writing of code. I do realize in our application of the 25% remodel threshold, that was not the intent to trigger a full remodel of a parking lot. So if you are remodeling 25%, or let's say 26% of your building, the intent of that threshold is really at the use perspective of it. So I am thinking we might need to add some clarifying language because we'll take Balcom and Green building, which they have parking on the side. If they renovate 25% of their building, it would be very, very challenging to, they would have to basically construct a new building to hide the parking. In my writing of this code and staff review, that was not the intent. So I think we need to add some language when the parking trigger, which in my mind is when you're developing a vacant parcel or a parcel that has been demolished and you're starting new, because that's when you're really designing a project and you can design it to that. I will just mention that. I know that's on the fly a change, but I think we could clarify that in the second reading rewrite if you guys do move forward. And then also in light of this, if you guys are wanting to make changes to that threshold, another possibility would be to change the 25% alteration, demolition, building permit addition to just the ground floor, just as a consideration from what I heard. So I thought I would provide you with some avenues and throw it back to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Counselor Sachter,
Are we ready for comments?
we're ready for comments. No.
Well, first of all, I appreciate this. I've been a tenant in one of those buildings, and unintended consequences is one of the fears that every council should have. Even though we may seem pretty straightforward and forward in our deliberations, as I listen to this, and originally I am in favor as large an overlay zone as we can do and still accomplish our goals. And I think the public has raised some issues now that, hey, you may be stepping too far and not accomplishing your goals. And I think it's worth reconsidering some shrinkage west of the roundabout and on Colorado as talked, because I think there's some good points. And going back to why this happened, the catalyst for a ride besides general volatility or vitality is, remember, was Grand Avenue losing multiple and a little bit of small remodel on Cooper as well. And these areas that have been brought up to us, as they've said, do not have the types of business that we're most concerned about. So I think dealing with the threshold, as Hannah said, tweaking parking somehow, and perhaps in spite of our enthusiasm, looking at the reality of shrinking that primary zone and making sure that these businesses can still thrive is definitely worth a look. Thank you.
Great. Counselor Kaup.
Okay, and I'd like to say too, I really appreciate the comments because it's a perspective that we need to hear. I think that professional offices downtown, as far as year-round occupancy and vibrancy and having people downtown to go to restaurants. The other piece, and I have a question because we talked about this last time. I was kind of concerned that as the government center, you know, we do have the courthouse, we do have the county building and city hall and others. And I thought that we were going to exempt institutional and government buildings, but I don't see it listed here in our exemptions. So did we change that?
It says outer boundary. The outer boundary, if you go to the actual map and it says outer boundary, underneath it, it says institutional.
But we don't. But we
Here,
don't
hold on
have
one
it as
second
a
here.
general
And-
exemption.
No, we do not. And that was discussed at the last work session. So what staff heard, and if we got this wrong, please do correct us because this was feedback from you. We decided not to exempt institutions, including government.
Okay. And then, and I guess for me, this conversation just kind of reaffirmed that to me, it is important that Glenwood Springs is the county seat. And we have the courthouse here. And so that demands a certain amount of professional services to go along with it. So I don't know. I'm convinced by a lot of these arguments that we don't want to put our tourism needs, or not so much needs, but wants in front of our local businesses. And especially in light of the way that retail space has gone, I think maybe we've really overreached with the boundary. So I'm looking at the boundary that you guys brought to us last time, which was very, much smaller, basically the GID, I think, or close to it. That maybe we should look at going back to something like that.
Thank you. Counselor Zelinski.
So in our discussion, when we were looking at this like two-tier overlay, it was pretty intentional to move back that part of Cooper and put that into the green. And so it seems very reasonable that we could put green into that 800 block of Colorado with the same kind of intention, just recognizing. And I'll be perfectly honest, when we had this conversation, it never even occurred to me where SGM is, honestly, and that is like completely inappropriately included. You know, you just take things for granted. So, I think that, I think that having this public input has been, really useful. I think the intent is still there. And retail has evolved. I think we're in a different, this isn't just for tourists. I think that this is the thing that I think that there's a misconception that we're not trying to revitalize this. When those businesses went away, when A&B Bank came in and renovated, those were local businesses. And so I think to couch this as we're catering to tourism is we're trying to create a community for the community. If we are disregarding professional services that have historically been embedded as part of that community, that's not the intent either. So, I don't think a real estate office on Grand Avenue is a great use of that space. But I also don't think that displacing historic services are a good use either. So I think a greater conversation is appropriate.
Counselor Dem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Real quick, I think I was the one asking about the institutional or government offices, and I thought the consensus was might as well. Because even though it's in the location and extent, they do look at what we would like, and it makes them, maybe act a little different. But From what I hear, and thank you for all your input, there's always another facet we just don't think of or don't spend enough time on it. So what I gather from the council, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in item 14, ordinance 2013-09, this downtown design overlay, I would like to move to continue this item for further discussion. One more workshop where we can all sit down and put our 2 cents in and make sure that we get this right. Talk about everything we heard and just spend a little more time on it.
Is there a second? Counselor Weimer.
Seconded.
Okay, perfect. Just for a point for the record, it was actually ordinance 2023-09. 2013,
Oh, 13.
but that's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Do we want to call the question? Thank you. Motion to continue.
It's unanimous. It passes 6-0.
Thank you.
Counselor Dim, just for a little bit of clarity, would you like that to come back at a work session before we're back on a first reading again? Or do you want to bring it back for a first reading with some modifications?
I personally think, and let's take temperature here on council, I think we should sit down for 1 more hour at a work session
I do too.
and iron this out before we do a
Yeah.
first. reading.
Okay,
That's
thank
how-
you.
Yeah.
That-
Yeah.
That's what I heard. I just wanted to make sure that was
Yeah.
what the expectation of
Yeah.
everybody was. Thank you.
I will also say thank you to those who showed up this evening. I didn't hear a hard no on the idea, just helping us fine tune it. So we thank you. Oh. What? Okay. You all heard me, but thank you.
Just real quick, I guess I have to give a date when I think this should come back, and I would do it as soon as possible, like next meeting.
I'm sure we'll look and shuffle.
There you go.
I'm sorry, what meeting are you gone? I just want to make sure it's that one.
Yeah, I'm not telling you, so pick little roulette, soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move back to item 13 that we had held off on. And we're gonna get to ordinance 2023-10 code amendments to title 070, including sections 070, 040, 080, and 070, 040, 090 relating to site and building design.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Hello.
Hannah
Nice to see you
Clemens,
again.
Community Development Director. So on to the next great topic. What we're looking at here are code amendments to sections of our development code that relate to site and building design for residential and non-residential properties. Both of those are included. Planning and Zoning Commission did review these code amendments at their May 23rd meeting and did vote unanimously to recommend the amendments, and we took some extensive comments that they give back to craft the language in front of you now. So really why this is coming about is quite frequently when staff is implementing code, and we did have a complete code rewrite in 2018. So since then, we've found instances where the code is not quite working as we believe it is intended to work. And so some recent developments have highlighted that our housing variety section, the section that regulates providing a variety of housing types, is not quite working how I believe the community or council intends. An example is, well, I guess I should back up. So this threshold kicks in for large development parcels currently. So if you're proposing a residential development on larger than 3 acres, this housing variety kicks in, and it's a requirement to provide at least 2 types if you're on 3 acres, or 3 types if you're on 6 acres. So more types if you're on a larger parcel. And those types are identified as different residential dwellings. So that includes single family, detached product, accessory dwelling units, 2-family dwelling units, which duplex, single family townhouse dwellings. So that's an attached product. And multifamily dwellings other than the 2-family or townhouse dwellings. Those are the types that you can currently choose from. What staff has discovered is that there are no thresholds for how much of the types you need to provide. And so what this allows for is a token variety to come in and meet the standard, which we do not think was the intent. So that is where this conversation started. and then reviewing our comprehensive plan and city policies around affordability also. We do believe the intent was to provide not only just a variety of architectural housing types, but a variety of price points as well through various mechanisms of size and other means. And so staff has crafted code before you that does include those components added as housing variety types. With Planning and Zoning Commission, we also crafted some new threshold ideas. So instead of a 3-acre or a 6-acre parcel, we are looking at thresholds of 40-unit projects, and then 80-unit projects, and then 120-unit projects with a tiered system. So the 40-unit projects requiring 2 housing types, 80-unit projects requiring 3 housing types, and 120-unit projects quite large requiring 4 housing types. And then we did add housing types to the list. So we created a longer list, we changed up the thresholds, and then we also put in how much of each you have to provide. So a minimum threshold. Even as I'm talking, this is very complicated in my head. A minimum threshold that each type you provide has to be a certain percentage of the total so that you don't just get 1 or 2. So trying to mitigate what we have seen come in from developers. So the different housing types that are in front of you for consideration, adding to that list, have to do with affordability, of course. And so we have one that is 100% of units being resident occupied as defined by our housing guidelines. So if you'll recall, that's meaning someone who works within certain geographic areas. We have a tiered system. So this would reference those housing guidelines and be implemented the same way. So a housing category for a developer to choose is all of my units will be resident occupied by Glenwood Springs or 81601 employees. The second one is 70% of the total number of units being deed restricted at or below an average of 100, or sorry, not below, restricted to an average of 100% area median income. So that's truly getting to an affordability component. And then the third one is looking at projects, regulating projects, excuse me, to provide a variety of bedroom types. And so we've included 3 different bedroom count configurations. So this could be studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedrooms, basically getting at a development providing a variety of bedroom counts, which we can also see leads to different housing options and choices for people at different stages in their life. So those are the categories that we've added. Of course, we have added some exceptions. In thinking also that some of these components, as we've heard from development, can add costs. That's why developers haven't been chomping at the bit to provide a variety of housing types. Providing multifamily apartment complex next to townhouses does require a little bit more cost in design and implementation. So there's that hesitancy. So in an effort to not hinder the affordability measures that we're trying to get at, we have included an exception for projects where 100% of the units are restricted to below 90% area income. And what this is really getting at is the low-income housing tax credit projects, the Habitat for Humanity projects, or projects initiated by mission-driven organizations that are providing heavy subsidies to bring it down below our 100%, which we consider workforce. So telling those developers, we're exempting them here because the benefit of their affordability outweighs the other aspects of architectural variety in their regard. That's something for you to consider and think about. We also added a mechanism. These are the flexibility measures, a fee in lieu. And so similar to other sections of our code that have a fee in lieu, if you are triggered with a development under this code, but it's really not going to work and you'd rather pay the city a designated amount of money to pay out of that requirement, this is a mechanism. So staff has included that, and that would be a amount to be determined by resolution of city council. It's not something that I expect us to determine tonight. And I've included some language in there regarding the advantages and disadvantages of having fee in lieu for your consideration. Obviously, we have put in that the funds from the fee in lieu would go towards affordable and workforce housing, including such a program as a buy down program, which we've spoken about on other aspects. As far as how this plays with our inclusionary zoning, they are compatible. So if you're required in a development to provide community housing, those numbers can count towards meeting some of your criteria. Obviously, this criteria is expanding quite a bit on what we require for inclusionary zoning. So this is upping the ante as far as providing either affordable or the resident occupancy or a diverse number of bedrooms, or perhaps if you're a very large project, all three. Included in this code amendment is some other sections that staff has reviewed and has been having challenges with in implementation. So we're taking this opportunity to clean that up as well. If you do not want to move forward with the housing variety types, I think we should have a conversation about those other pieces so that we can move those forward if they need to be separated. But there are some kind of usual and customary errors that we're trying to correct here, and I can point out what those are that are included in this code change. As far as applicability, currently our residential design standards are the only section of our code that requires this. It's not included in our mixed use. And so in considering adding this to that section, mixed use and commercial design, in speaking with Planning and Zoning Commission, they believe that commercial should count as a type because it's going to look different. So it does kind of get to that variation in architectural features that this original tent was aimed at. So we added that as a category. So meeting the two categories is fairly easy. Gives them a little bit of flexibility there. Reading all the changes. But then it essentially a mixed use commercial site coming in today does not have to provide housing variety if all of the buildings are mixed use. There is a very small footnote that we discovered in rewriting this code in our current residential standards that does state if a mixed use development has buildings within the development that are only residential, that is subject to the housing variety. So I did want to update you on that. It does currently exist. And so any project coming in that was proposing a 3-acre parcel with mixed use buildings and a residential only building is going to have to provide the 2 housing types, or if they're over 6 acres, they're going to have to provide the 3 currently. So let's get to review criteria and staff analysis. A code amendment is a legislative decision by City Council with recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And prior to approving a proposed code amendment, City Council shall consider whether and to what extent the proposed amendment meets the following 5 criteria. I provided staff analysis of those 5 criteria in your packet, including the new and revised goals from our comprehensive plan that would support this code change. We do not believe it conflicts with other provisions of the code or policies, is necessary to address a demonstrated community need. I believe I covered that. With the changes, and also our 2019 regional housing study is necessary to respond to substantial changes and conditions in policy and is consistent with the general purpose and intent of this code. So staff has found in our recommendation, if you move forward with this, that it does meet the 5 criteria for a code amendment. As far as review, I did mention before, but I'll point it out again, these proposed amendments do have the possibility to make development projects incur additional costs in application of them. So we are expecting that. And there are likely comments from developers to speak to that, the cost of what this would actually take. And so with that, I will turn it over to council for questions and also point out we do have a developer in the room that came to listen to this conversation. And so she may be a resource if you have questions from the developer side. And I already spoke to her. I'm not putting her on the spot. She was amenable to that. So she is in the room and may want to speak in public comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to council for council questions and we'll start with Counselor Den.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quick question, and this is just jumbled in my head. You're mentioning acres. You're mentioning 3 acres and 6 acres. What happened to minor subdivision, major subdivision?
That still applies. That's a different section of code. Not touching that one.
Okay, so this is different.
So let's say a minor site and architectural review,
Uh-huh.
which is planning and zoning commission authority between 9 and 24 residential units. That's not even gonna hit these thresholds, but if they, let's
What if it
say,
hits 3 acres?
if it hit 3 acres with 24 units, that's a single family neighborhood, by the way.
Right?
Right.
That
Right.
yes, staff applies these design
Okay.
criteria. So
Okay.
the minor site and the major site are under our development permits. Development permits are reviewed using this section of code.
Okay. I know it's all correct. I'm just trying to get it right in my head. That's all. Thank you.
Perfectly understandable.
Counselor Zelinski.
Okay, so this is just probably my ignorance speaking, but the very last thing that you mentioned, talking about development that's mixed use with residential only component and the size of it. Is there a threshold for number of residential units? So say it's like mixed use and then there's a little corner that's like got, maybe 2 triplexes or 3 triplexes, so 9 units. Do they have to have 2 different varieties? Because it's just one small, like maybe there's a corner that they just wanted to put some housing in.
I see Carl would like.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I can just jump in. It's gonna be under that number would be underneath the number thresholds that were recommended by the planning commission. I know there's gonna be some discussion about whether those thresholds are low enough or not.
Got it.
For sure, but I think at like 9, you would probably be under whatever threshold, so it wouldn't be,
It wouldn't trigger.
it wouldn't.
Okay, I just wanted clarity on that. Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Kaup.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you. As I was reading through this and I know we had this discussion that we're all feeling the pressure of the number of market rate apartments that have come in the last 3 years and feeling like, it's changing the character of the community and makeup of the community. And I guess, but I've also we have a lot coming together right now. We have 2C coming together. We have the strategic housing plan that's in draft form right now. We have the ideas of Proposition 123 coming into play, all working towards affordable housing. But this is more focused on what kind of housing mix do we need? And I guess what I'm wondering is what are we basing this quantification on? What's our goal? Like, I kind of want to see, maybe from the strategic housing plan, is how many housing units do we have? What's been the change of mix from, say, 2019 to today with all the new building that we've had? And what's our goal? Like, what percentage of housing units overall do we want to be owner occupied, for sale versus rental apartment units? And we can get into AMI categories and all of that. That's kind of a separate issue. But so I'm just wondering, is there a way to have this be quantitatively driven so that we have goals and numbers that we're actually working for? So when we look at a bigger development, we can say, this is what our community needs. This is why, because to me, like the 10% seemed really random. So we have a 40 unit development coming in and we'll get maybe 4 townhomes out of it if we're lucky, and the rest will be another kind. So I was wanting to say, well, we probably want at least 25%, but I don't know what that number should be.
If I can, so.
Okay.
Remembering that you guys, the last council triggered this conversation about
exactly.
housing variety.
No, and I think I helped trigger
Yeah,
that.
and
because-
so I do think, from a policy standpoint, I mean, it is tough there. so the legalese drafter in me, when you were saying that,
Mhm.
you know, you're wanting to be flexible in what gets applied to which project, and the legalese in me is like, yeah, that's not gonna work. Cause I have to have a standard that I can apply across the board.
And I'm okay with the standard, but what I'm looking for is to have our goal of this policy based on a
Right.
quantification.
And I think, I'm sure, and I'll let Hannah talk to the getting the statistics.
Mhm.
I'm feeling a tad bit of pressure to get something in place
Right.
before the next series of projects hit.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
I will tell you from my standpoint, we've been a little behind the curve a couple of different times in housing cycles. And I think that's a little bit, I think we are all feeling the pressure of not only that, but also what's going on at the state level on getting some things in place ahead of that curve. So
So my question for you would then be, if we were to get something in place now, can we still work on that quantifying piece?
absolutely. I mean, I think
Big
that, I
goal.
think that, I mean, I guess I would recommend go big right now,
Right.
because it's easier to pull back than it is to push forward.
Right.
Like that, I mean, in terms of those numbers, I mean, if you left it to me, like I would push that number up to, like you said, 25%. I would lower the threshold to 20.
Right.
And I will tell you, part of the reason for that is in talking to Hannah about the building permits that have been pulled by kind of our local developers. 13 is the maximum we've seen from somebody who is kind of what we think of as our traditional local infill developer.
Mhm.
Everybody else is really big out of town corporation.
It's really, right. So if we, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just gonna say, you know, Hannah and I've had lots of conversations on this. And one of the things that struck me was in the last analysis, was it 2019? You know, the types of homes that are needed,
Mhm.
that were in that analysis. And if you look at that and you look at the majority of units that have been built since then,
Yeah.
what you're missing is variety.
Right.
You've
exactly.
seen primarily.
And we feel it.
Right,
Right.
primarily
You see it.
one bedroom apartments
Mhm.
or ADUs.
Right.
And so that's where we talked about having in here language about types of units, but also size of units. Because types is like townhome, sixplex, you know, whatever. But they could all be one bedroom.
Right.
So that's why I had said, well, ask them if they would consider, meaning at the PNC, consider the types of units, meaning 2, 1, 2, 3 bedroom.
Yeah.
Because that's what we really haven't made a lot of headway. And I think the next analysis will show that.
Okay.
So I think it's important, and I agree with Carl, I'd rather us ask for more and pull back
And
from
pull
it.
back. Okay.
Because it's, again, gets back to the conversation that we had at the work session and with the downtown overlay. What you put in here is how quickly or how slowly you will see change.
Right. And I think there is a sense of urgency right now to get something on the books. But these were the questions that were coming up as I was reading it and wanting to know what we're working towards as a goal. But I would agree. My question was, where'd the 10% come from? Can it be 25 or 30 or 20? And is the 40 number appropriate? And then I had questions on items. So I'm looking at the actual code text amendment and where you say variety types of housing. Numbers 7, 8, and 9. I get including the different bedroom count, but I would rather see that be just a subset, say, of the multifamily apartment type buildings and not let it be a full type of its own, just because, you know, if we have 2 types, it's like, okay, you can have apartments and we're going to give you different size bedrooms. To me, those aren't 2 different types. We're still only getting apartments. So I think that should be more of a something. Sorry, I'm getting into comments, but okay. And then I had a question on fee in lieu. Do we have to offer a fee in lieu?
Okay, there was a lot of questions there.
Sorry.
So I'm gonna let Carl answer the fee in lieu first. Then
Okay.
I'm going to get to I just want to lay this out so I don't forget a lot of them.
Okay,
Um,
sorry.
The 3-bedroom count.
Yeah, the bedroom count thing.
So the reason we had the discussion around the fee in lieu is there are moments and places where maybe some of those other housing types just don't work for whatever reason. Site design, location, interest of the developer, and frankly, wanting to somewhat accommodate the development community, recognizing that some projects move forward based on free market units. That having been said, we don't want to lose out on the opportunity to maybe be able to fund different types of programs. So a meaningful fee in lieu, and I'm not thinking $8,000 of fee in lieu, I'm thinking, 15% of purchase price, right? $100,000, $150,000. You can take that and then use it as part of a deed restricted buy down program to help a local who is trying to close the gap on being able to buy that first home in town. Now we have a funding stream where we can say, here's $100,000 that you need to put a workforce and RO restriction on that home. That's kind of the thought behind it, is that if a developer really wants to buy their way out of some percentage, okay, that's fine, but let's give us a revenue stream where we can help some of our local population maybe get into townhomes, single family residences, things like that. And we are seeing a fair amount of success in particularly Eagle County with those buy down programs. They're really popular. I want to say
Okay.
Avon did probably 15 buy downs last year like that got deed restrictions on what were free market units with that $100,000 per unit.
Okay,
That's kind of the theory behind it.
all right. But if we were to set that fee in lieu, another council 3 years from now could change it.
Absolutely. And you know what? Another council could change this
Could
code
change the
section.
whole thing.
Can
Okay.
change the whole thing.
All right, just,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to your
Thank
last
you.
question though. And I probably, remind me if I missed the other ones. So you mentioned the 10% threshold seeming a little random, and also the three different bedroom count configurations, maybe not counting as a type. So the 10%, and staff has to start somewhere. Clearly I got you thinking, so success. But what we're what we're changing here from what we currently have with the 3-acre parcels, what that's coming in at for your information. And I keep endless spreadsheets, which I apparently need to share more with you guys on what's coming in and what it looks like. A 3-acre parcel is going to have 100 units or more. That's what we're seeing.
Right.
So we have lowered the threshold significantly to go down to 40 units.
Okay.
So where before or currently, 100-unit project has to provide 2 types, we're lowering that down to 40. And so with that, I didn't want to go too high on the percentage.
Okay.
But of course, with any code amendment that staff is putting out, this is for your review and suggestions of change. So if you think that should be higher, we can absolutely change that on second reading or continue the next meeting or however long this takes to get there. So that was the rationale behind the 10%, because we have lowered the other threshold.
Okay.
And then also, this is a very large change. I think I did mention in the staff report, I used the word aggressive, which, we're in aggressive times. But we also do want to allow some flexibility and able to get there so that we don't possibly, and this can be a direction you decide, but there are implications that it could really pull back on a developer making the choice to develop or not. So I'll throw that out there and just say that the 3 different bedroom count configuration was a consideration in looking at my spreadsheet. We don't have many projects that have all 3. There are a few here and there, but it's not usually the norm. So that was getting at that, like just a bigger variety within a project itself. Meets some of the goals that we just went through in the comp plan, social diversity and things like that, and how we manage our other programs where we like to have things throughout a development and not, uniform. I have lived in Soviet bloc housing. I know what that's like. We don't want that. So that's a little bit of that, is adding that as a category with a carrot. Like if you have to eke out that second one, at least give us 3 different bedroom variety counts. So that's an allowance. It's speaking to the flexibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Weimer.
So I think that was a good
Okay, go ahead.
that was a good segue, Hannah, because that's kind of where my head's at the moment. And this is a question. So so I understand the sort of the impetus and the rationale behind structuring different bedroom counts, right? I like that. I appreciate it. I understand it. What is the sort of the impetus behind the different types that you have to have apartments and duplexes? What are we trying to accomplish with that beyond visual interest?
You nailed it.
Yeah.
Visual interest.
So nothing is the answer.
Yeah,
Well, nothing.
no, and
Then help me.
can I
We're
actually
not
add-
talking for sale units. We're
Yeah, no.
talking apartments and.
we're talking
town-
anything,
Yeah.
we're talking anything. So that variety of type that we're
But,
seeing.
but a lot of the examples have been apartments and duplexes.
Right, so, or
So
it
I'm
could
trying to
be,
understand
so,
that.
so one of the things that's interesting that we did in this, and credit to Hannah and her creativity, is that one of the mixes of types could be a resident occupied restriction, right? So we're doing more than just creating visual interest. We're creating a variety of community type, right? Which is, we're doing both those things. So it's not just built environment. It is also community building in the like most fundamental form by forcing a mix and variety of types of housing that include maybe an RO restriction, which is a really easy one to give if you want to do a bunch of, if you want to do 40 apartments, have them all resident occupied so that they actually serve our workforce and our residents. Great. That creates a different sense of community. So it's really doing two things in there. Along with the visual, it's creating a variety of community type.
And I will add to that, just based on code. So we have purpose statements and intent statements at the beginning of each of our code sections. And that's really to inform planners, like what is actually this section meant to do. So it gives us direction. And so I would point to the purpose statement of the overall site and building design. Currently, it reads, encourage a variety of housing choices for Glenwood Springs residents. We are adding language there at varying affordability levels because we think that that is a part of housing choice, a very important part of housing choice. So that is one purpose statement. And then when you get to the general intent of the section that we are really changing, there's two aspects that play into what you just asked. So these residential building design standards are generally intended to, item B states, avoid repetitive patterns of residential development. We have seen that as a complaint among recent projects, and reinforce the diversity of architectural styles that exist within Glenwood Springs. So those, just to lend some clarity around what our current code was intended to do and how we're interpreting that it needs some updating based on a lot of the outreach that we've done for the comprehensive plan in adding more choice, more availability, more options.
Can that be enforced instead through site plan review?
That's exactly what this gives us the ability to do, right?
Instead of mandating it up front, can it be something that's just reviewed site by site?
We have to have some set of standards to review those against. And I mean, quite literally, this is that tool on that site plan review when that comes in.
Yeah.
Is to review it in against this backdrop of design standards.
Okay.
It's kind of a building block for what we anticipate, what we would want to see from a developer. So when they bring that site plan to us, we have a higher likelihood, they have a higher likelihood of success because they're meeting some of our established goals.
And I think this is an appropriate time to mention, and then I mean, you guys have a lot of questions and then we can get to the comments too. They're blurred. This is an alternative equivalent compliance section. So that is always kind of our flexibility that's planned into this. And so what that section allows would apply to this code. This is under C, administration, in page 2 of the actual code rewrite. And it states, to encourage creative and unique design, alternative equivalent compliance allows development to occur in a manner that meets the intent of this section, yet through an alternative design that does not strictly adhere to the section's standards. And so when someone comes in, when a developer comes in with an alternative equivalent compliance request, they do have to make an argument for several criteria. And basically those criteria boil down to it exceeds the standard that you're talking about in this number of ways. And that is to allow for changes in technology, new materials that come out that our code can't quite keep up fast enough. Something new and better might have come out, and we're allowing a developer to come in and show us why it's better than what we have. And so it does allow a little flexibility. With these specific changes around affordability and type, that those are going to be challenging arguments to make. But in making those, the decision-making body who is reviewing the minor or major site and architectural review plan is the decision authority on whether they approve the alternative equivalent compliance because they believe those criteria have been met. I will say in talking with developers, that's not quite as much flexibility as they desire, and we might look at different avenues, but that exists currently in code to show that the product that they're bringing does meet the intent of what the city wants.
Thank you, Hannah. Counselor Schechter.
Thank you. Hannah, and Carl mentioned more restrictive, I've got a note here. I have a question. If I understand this, number one, if we're talking about a 40-unit development, okay, under this proposal, it could be 100% RO, but still 40 units of multifamily that could like a mini Meadows. If the difference is it's RO, correct? All right.
That would be two. Yep.
All right, I'll comment later about that. Okay. Then if we're looking at other parts that had to do with, are we still dealing with some of these other things like parking and garages too? That were proposed in this, or is that already in the code? These aren't changes?
The only changes are the underlined.
Okay, then,
My apologies. I included the entire section.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
So only,
Yeah.
and then I guess the other question related to the change of types, not the entire code, thank you. And maybe it had to do with some of what Counselor Kopp was asking. For future reference, does the department have a pretty good inventory of the current number of residential units in town and how many of them are owner occupied units?
I wouldn't say that's we don't have strong statistics outside of the US Census. I can speak. It's not something that was in our regional study very thoroughly, so I can't speak to that.
We don't.
With authority outside of getting on uscensus.gov and pulling up those statistics.
And once upon a time, you and I were in a workshop a long time ago that they talked about ideal town character and mixes. And at that point, if I remember correctly, the industry benchmark was, well, at least 60% ought to be owner occupied and 40% rental. Has there been everything changes. Is there a benchmark we can look at as a long-term strategic goal in this picture?
I like how you're talking about long ago, dating both of ourselves. I think there will be some statistics coming out of the strategic housing plan update that speak to this mix. And I will go back in 2019 because it has been a while. So there might be something within that. I have not heard major shifts in industry standards when we're looking at that, owner occupied versus rentals. I don't know if our city manager had a point. Okay. So I can't answer that entirely fully, but a 60-40, you might be able to think about that yourselves and thinking of other communities that are dealing with second home ownership and what that looks like.
I'm going to say that I think we may be deviating a little bit from the purpose of the agenda item, just a little bit when we're talking about second home ownership. I think the idea being is we're talking about developments, new developments and what they look like. So I don't want to, maybe I'm missing your point, but.
No, it's not even
Okay.
second ownership.
Okay.
It's how many people live in the house they own
Okay.
versus rent.
Sure. Okay.
Which is a bigger, and then again, maybe I was reading too much of the code. were remodel or thresholds involved in this consideration or not? Where you mentioned, somewhere it was mentioned, you might have had threshold too high and you were lowering it. Was that part of this discussion, or is that just part of the big code that I read too much?
Yes, but the last part, I think really we're talking about, primarily here, we're talking about new development going vertical. So that's kind of a different.
I don't have any other
That
questions at this
threshold
point.
is just one of the errors adjustments that we're making. It is not tied to the housing variety threshold.
Thank you.
Counselor Dem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So for the sake of moving forward, if we were inclined to approve this as the P and Z recommends, how could we take some time and figure out what Councillor Kaup said to adjust the
Yeah,
numbers?
and here's my suggestion for tonight was going to be, and I know you need to see if there's any public. I would love to get a first reading on the books because they're, like I said, I'm feeling a sense of urgency, and I think it's important for the community to hear that we've taken some aggressive, we're in the middle of that.
Okay,
I do think we could take a little bit of time between first and second reading if you wanted to. Maybe, well, you're not going to be here on the 20th. I don't know if you're going to need to be or not. I think that, you know, in any amount of time other than several months, I don't know that we really are going to be able to get any closer to a statistical basis for the threshold numbers or what percentage of a development should be a different type.
I agree.
Necessarily. I was going to bring this up in my report if we get there. But one of the I had a long conversation with Nathan Lindquist from the governor's office yesterday. One of the things we were talking about a lot was what we really are missing is setting goals for kind of what percentage of our workforce do we want to house in our communities and some of those things. So I think that may be coming in a different form. But I don't know that we can get there with this. I think part of this is we're taking a leap of faith.
right. Okay,
Carl
thank you,
just,
Carl.
I'm gonna,
Pardon my intrusion.
oh yeah.
Carl just made me think of something that is coming out of the strategic housing plan. There are recommendations around that specific item of if we want to, it's more of a question with recommendations. If we want to house a certain percentage of our workforce within Glenwood Springs, we should do X. Right. Yes. Looking at Watkins for confirmation. So there is some of that that's coming out. That draft is going before Planning and Zoning Commission in 2 weeks. So we're going to be discussing that. So some of those components are on the way.
Okay.
To discuss, and they have statistical data to back that up.
Okay, great. Counselor Kaup.
I have one more very quick question. I don't want to dominate this, but so we're talking about in the variety of housing types, you talk about resident occupancy, but that is not to be confused with owner occupied. Is that correct?
Different, yes.
So we don't have a housing type? Can we specify
Well,
owner
I think
occupied?
RO, if you're talking about owned, then it's the owner is the resident, right? Or if it's a rental, it is somebody in the workforce.
Right, if it's a for sale product, then the owner is going to be the tenant.
Right, but we don't have anything that requires owner.
I think it's a tie back. I had the same
Okay.
question. If I
Okay.
remember right, it's a tie back to our definition of resident occupied.
Most likely.
Yeah, Hannah's not remembered, but I had the same question regarding ownership versus just using the term, you know, our resident occupied, and it's a tie back to how we define resident occupied as being an owner or a workforce renter, essentially.
Right, okay.
And
All right, thanks.
we need to be very careful when we throw out the terms owner occupied as a regulation. That has some serious implications that was actually talked about with the last bill that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So industry standard to not have a specific owner occupied regulation. And when my brain starts functioning again, I'll tell you why.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. I am now going to open this up to some public comment, since it is an ordinance. So if there's anybody here from the community, you're more than welcome to come up and speak to us for 3 minutes. Just please state your name and if you live in city limits.
Hi, my name is Lisa Sorensen. Yes, Hannah
suggested I come up and join tonight. Thank you very much for the invitation. I just want a full disclosure. I am a developer. I am a affordable housing developer, not one of those market rate guys. Full disclosure, we do have a site we're looking at in Glenwood for a potential tax credit project, but any comments I make tonight would not benefit me in that project. It would be meant to benefit this community. So I just want to make that clear. I have read through, as Hannah suggested, this housing, this variety and housing options. And I think so we often include 2 and 3 bedrooms in our communities because we do believe that's important. And I can understand why the city, this would be important to you as well, because I do understand there are a lot of the 1-bedroom units that come through. I did mention, as Hannah mentioned in her presentation here, I do think it's very important you have that. And in this discussion, it's been mentioned as well, that the flexibility is just so important. So as developers, we have for that, but just, you know, if you have someone coming in and just can't get it done, you know, they're trying, and any good developer is going to try and meet the goals of a city. I mean, that is just really a good measure. And then, as was discussed, the fees to opt out. My only comment, I actually am in full agreement of making the fees to opt out quite steep, because it is often, we don't, because we're usually the ones doing the affordable. But so just, I didn't say where I was from. I'm sorry. I am actually live in Denver.
Okay, thank you.
So I am from Denver.
Okay.
I've lived in Colorado most of my life, though, and I love Colorado's Glenwood Springs. It's a wonderful city. So, but anyway, in my experience in sort of the Denver metro, most all developer fees will opt out if they can.
Okay.
So I love the idea of putting it into a fund. I think that is circular, goes back to the community, goes back to the residents. So really, I didn't see, I will comment on the construction costs. I don't know, for instance, how much more specifically to add a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or a duplex. As everyone here is aware, we have experienced extraordinary construction cost increases. We have a project in Englewood, Colorado. We budgeted it, just construction costs, $209,000 a unit. When we budgeted, end up building it at $280,000. That's just what we paid our GC. TDC is over $400,000 a unit. So this has just been crazy times, and topped on interest rates. It is hard to get these pro formas to work. It really is. So that's where that flexibility thing comes in, which you guys have covered. So that would really just be my comments, and thank you. It was very enjoyable joining your meeting tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. We appreciate your feedback. I'm going to bring it back to council, and it does seem like maybe there's someone who would like to make a motion. And then once we have a motion on the table, we'll open it for comments.
Is that for me?
That's for you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
Let's see, item 13, ordinance 2023-10 code amendments to title 070, including sections 070040080, 070040090 related to site and building design. I would move that we approve the recommended code changes recommended by the P&Z code changes with the following changes. I would move the threshold from 40 to 20, from 80 to 60, and from 120 to 100. And I would move the 10% for the 3-bedroom or each bedroom type to 25.
You want to add that?
Oh, based on obviously the 5 criteria that Hannah pointed out
On page 3.
on page 3.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, a motion by Counselor Dem, a second by Counselor Kaup. Let's go ahead and open it for any comments. Does anybody have any comments before we vote? Let me undo some of these. Okay, go ahead, Counselor Kaup.
Quick comment on the variety of housing types, number 7. Again, the inclusion of 3 different bedroom count configurations. Each bedroom type shall be a minimum of 10% of the total dwelling units. If you're amenable, Counselor Dem, could we also raise that minimum to 25%? Or
no, fine. 25% sounds fair across the board.
Okay.
So we have an amended motion and second.
Okay.
Then
Was that
anything else?
clear?
I believe so.
Okay, anything else? Counselor Cow? Are you all set?
I'm done.
Okay, Counselor Schachter.
Oh, I just
Oops,
did
you,
it again.
yep, that's okay. Okay, ready?
Censorship
Okay.
might be better for everybody. My comment is, I think we are, in this condition, we are far better off moving ahead quicker. Unlike that prior discussion about unintended consequences, this one has intended consequences.
Right.
And we can tweak it later. We are up against the
Mhm.
wall, and I would have supported that lower threshold anyway, so I think we're right on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Counselor Zelinski.
I just want to say thanks. This looks like a huge amount of work and it addressed so many of the concerns that I've heard from the community at large. And so I appreciate that attention to detail. And I'm in full agreement with Councilman Shatner that this is moving in the right direction.
Okay, great. Counselor Weimer.
So I don't know that I support this as it's written, and I think that my sticking point right now is the mandate, or it's the inclusion of different physical types as part of the overall requirement that you have to have two different. I feel like we can accomplish, and please change my mind, but like I feel like we can accomplish our goals and sort of meet our intention through the other sort of types that have been defined, while leaving the physical type mix off the list. That could then also be incentive for developers, or at least not a disincentive for developers who are looking to do something in the city. That perhaps by including the physical differences, physical types, we're overstepping, we're over regulating just a little bit and being a little too onerous and demanding. So that's my sense.
Okay, any other comments? I'm going to go ahead and give my comments too, and that is that I actually echo a little bit of Counselor Weimer's, and that I think that we need to be very cautious when we overregulate, because I think when we're on one end saying we need housing, and then on the other we put a lot of limitations on it.
Exactly.
I worry about that. However, I will say that the community, I hear so much feedback that they're not wanting these big monolithic buildings all over. They want a different type of product. And I get it. If we're saying we'll make an exception for lower, for a lower AMI or a nonprofit, what we're saying is we get it. It's cheaper and probably more affordable to build those. But when we're needing housing, it's hard to weigh those two values. So in this situation, though, I do lean very heavily on trusting that the Planning and Zoning Commission is so invested in making good recommendations to us and in making good decisions for this community. They're out there, they hear from the community, what the community is looking for and wanting. So I lean heavier on wanting to go with their original recommendation versus this amended one. However, for the sake of this ordinance, I am going to support it this evening, and we can dig into the weeds maybe and see if it's in alignment by a final rating. So I do have one more comment from Councilor Dev.
I think I can pass.
Okay. Are you going to pass? Okay. Okay. Is everyone comfortable if we call the question now? Any final comments? Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Zelinski, yes. Mayor Wusso, yes. Mayor Pro Tem Dame, yes. Counselor Weimer, no. Counselor Kaup, yes. Counselor Schachter, yes. It passes 5-1.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. We are going to take a 5-minute recess and we'll be back. Recess break. Okay, thank you all so much.
We have a new
We
player.
are back. We are back and we are going to jump right into item 15 from our agenda, which is short-term rental license fee review. Hi, Emery.
Okay, so I'm Emery Ellingson, Community Development, and presenting on short-term rental permit and fee review. So on May 18th, council had asked staff to look into researching vacation rental fees. And so staff put together a list of some other communities in Colorado and what fees they charge. And then just so for a recap, the city, we have two vacation rental permit types. Short-term rental permit, which allows for a short-term rental of the entire house. And then accessory tourist rental, which is limited to 1 bedroom. And again, short-term rental is anything for a period of 30 days and less. And currently the short-term rental permit costs $500 for the first time you have a permit. And that's good for a period of 2 years, and $300 for every renewal thereafter. And then with the accessory tourist rental, the cost is $300 for your first permit, and then $150 for every renewal period thereafter. Staff had looked at different communities in Colorado and just had recommended doing an increase of 20%, which would be $600 for the short-term rental for the first permit period, $400 for the renewals, and then that would translate to $360 for accessory tourist rental, and then $180 for the renewals. And so that was a sort of starting point for council to consider.
We're going to start with questions and we'll start with Councilor Dem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You mentioned, or Hannah mentioned last time when we brought this up, that it's the reason we're trying to do this is because cost is not covered to do the inspections and process the permits and all that. Is that correct? Was it a?
Correct. So yeah, part of that would be to reflect the increase in staff costs.
And is the 20% enough?
So that was what staff had suggested. So yeah.
So it is enough. Okay. I just want to hear it. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on this? I do have a comment that came from Councilor Godus. He connected with me prior to the meeting and wanted me to mention that he believes that we should keep the fees low for those people who only rent it for a certain, like less than 45-day period per year. And he's going to hate that I jump right in and say administratively that gets really tricky. So while I think it has some, it's warrants some, I mean, it makes sense to a degree. It's just challenging. So, but that is his recommendation. Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Councilor.
Along with that line, do we have a category for 45-day rental? Do we have that? We don't have that category. Okay, so that would be a new thing to create. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
I was just gonna add, Hannah just pointed out that if council did decide to increase a fee, they could also put a climber on it if they wanted to limit like maybe future changes and going past a certain point, that could be another component of whatever changes you may make.
Okay.
Yeah, so much per year, or again, the permit periods are on a 2-year basis, so you could extrapolate that out to a certain point, put a limit on it.
Okay, Councilor Weimer.
So this dovetails into my dumb question from last time, Hannah, where I asked, how are ADUs captured in this? And you said ADUs are not eligible for short-term rentals. This week's dumb question, as a follow-up, why not? Thank you.
Emery, do you want to answer that?
I could.
Oh.
I was just gonna hop in and say, at the time that we were working through the ADUs, the goal was to make sure that we were trying to make those available for workforce housing, which of course is pretty much in opposition to short-term rental. So that was the design. It's also why the most of the fees are lower on an ADU. And there's a number of programs to get yourself all the way out of the fees if you want to deed restrict for a number of years to local workforce housing as well.
I have no further question.
Okay. I'm gonna jump in and say that I would be comfortable seeing them even higher. I think that this is a commodity that I appreciate the opportunity for people to rent them. And I know that they can be very financially beneficial, allow people to stay here. But I also know that there is a degree of oversight and administration that goes into it. And I want to make sure that we're capturing that we're not overburdening the community development office with this type of lodging. So that's my comment. Counselor Zelinski.
So, and that brings up another point, if we're only looking at this, you said you could do it every 2 years, is when that in 2 years, those costs could jump again or change again. Would it be advisable to make them an annual rather than, so it's still a renewal, but instead of it being a 2-year permit, it would just be a 1-year permit? Or does that actually add cost? And-
So that's a good question, and you probably noticed on the matrix of communities, everybody else does it annually.
Yeah.
And I think staff's recommendation was to actually keep it biannual for 2 reasons. Is one that, would create more work on an annual basis for staff. And then also for permit holders, it is convenient. They do it once. They have their permit for 2 years. They can plan out what they want to do, how they want to do it for 2 years. And then if you switch it to annual, that would just, create kind of for both parties,
More work.
more work.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering, if it was like contrary to the intent.
The 2-year, I think it works well at the end of the day.
Yeah, hold on. Counselor Dem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. How much were you thinking increasing the fee to?
Why? Let's see. So
I'm
the
curious.
staff recommendation was 600 for initial STR permits and 400 for STR renewals. My recommendation is to jump it to 750 for STR initials. So not 600, but 700, and then 750, thank you, sorry. And then instead of the 400, every year it would be, or the renewal would be 500. I think it's negligible, but I think that it is appropriate, especially since we're seeing such an influx into the community. This is kind of segues to other conversations we've had this evening. I would not touch the ATR permits. I think those ATR permits are people who, they're offering rooms within their home. It's a completely different beast. They live there. It's their primary. So. Yeah, they're supplementing their income. So that would be my recommendation. So.
Did you say 750?
750 and 500. Aren't they nice round numbers? They are, aren't they?
The ATRs, leave it at their recommendation.
Leave it at the staff recommendation for ATRs and increase. It brings it also further reinforces that we recognize that this is, I don't want to go too far down this commercial use concept, but it is being used to create, it's a lodging form. And this is a business, and a lot of people are running them as businesses anymore. And I think that this helps offset that cost. Counselor Schachter.
And you can shut me up because I'm going to digress a little, but I hope as a segue to this, and it came up in our last conversation. Citywide, because we are so far below our maximum threshold, that I hope in the near future, we examine lowering that threshold considerably, which is a little separate issue. Thank you.
Counselor Kaup.
Would anyone be interested in going to indexing to the CPI as was suggested by staff? Just because I think it prevents the situation where, council and staff, we don't look at the fee for 6 years and then we're way kind of behind the 8 ball on covering costs. And otherwise it makes it automatic. And we've done that in some of our enterprise funds. To me, it makes sense.
I would very much recommend doing that with as many fees as possible.
Right.
Because then it just keeps, it doesn't always keep up with costs maybe internally, but it's a lot better than getting too far behind and then you have to do a significant jump. I always like to build in an escalator based on ENR, CPI, whatever's appropriate. In this case, I think it would be CPI.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
Thanks.
Counselor Dem.
Just one more quick question to Councilor Cap. So the initial jump is 600, 400, and then from there on out, it's CPI? Okay, thank you.
Bring it back to council for, actually, no, we're at council. I'll ask for someone to make a motion because it seems. Do we need to do public comment on this? Oh, great. Thank you. Public comment. Thank you. If you want to come up for your 3 minute, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it. Oh, sorry. 3 minutes, please state your name.
3 minutes, may I? I would like to recognize Emery. I
Yeah.
sent him a list of 9 questions
Yeah.
regarding this issue. And I copied Anna and also Councilor Ward, Councilor Godus, and very prompt response back from Emery. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah,
So,
thank you.
I certainly understand about.
Hold on one second. So your name
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is
Um,
Steve Casey.
and do you live in city limits?
Do it 990 Brush Creek Lane. in
Great.
Glenwood Park.
Thank you. And we'll start the 3 minutes.
Owner of the 3 Mile Creek Retreat. I saw this item, I think it was in the newspaper about, you guys wanted to talk about this. I'm against increasing the fees. But I have an option for you guys to consider. Now, I looked at this past year, the first quarter, the amount of money, not only myself, but that Airbnb paid the city was $906 for the first quarter, based upon my Airbnb operation. One of the interesting things that the city provided was there are 107 short-term rental permits and 11 accessory tourist rental permits, of which I'm 9%. I'm one person, but representing the 11, although they don't know that. So of the $906 that was basically the city benefited because of this little unique business enterprise, $654 was associated with occupancy tax. My suggestion, if you apply that $654 to the 18 or 118 units on a yearly basis, it's $308,000 the city is making off this unique and diverse enterprise. My feeling is don't increase the fees. If the cost to oversee this increases, take a portion of that occupancy tax that is received, and Emery said that the finance department could not yet tell me what percentage that is. Use those funds to offset the funds to maintain the program and administer the program. Stop raising fees for us. We have lived in that house for 35 years. The ability to rent out, we have a walkout basement. It's a 1-bedroom. It's really enjoyed by a lot of people. Keep the fees down. I would actually suggest removing the fees and even extending the 2-year period to like maybe a 5-year period. It would make it a lot easier for me as an owner operator. But thank you for your consideration of this time, and good luck with your decision.
And to clarify, that's an ATR that he's referencing, correct? Not an STR. Thank you. Thank you. He's an ATR. Okay. Mhm. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So this time I really will bring it back to council. I look for a motion. Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I may, in item.
So I didn't know if you had someone online.
Oh, is there someone online?
No.
No, there's no one online. Thank you.
Okay, again, if I may, item 15, short-term rental license fee review. I would move that we approve staff's recommendation to move the STR or the full house fees to 600 for the first initial setup, and then 400 every 2 years thereafter, and the ATR to whatever else they recommended. I don't remember.
360
360
for the permit and
the permit?
180 for renewals.
and 180 to renew it. And to implement the CPI from there on out to adjust those rates, so we don't have to really think about it too much.
Okay. Counselor Zelinski.
I would like to second that motion.
Okay. Do we have any comments before we vote? I feel like maybe I have lost my goal of increasing them. I don't see any support, so I think we'll call the question.
It passes 6-0.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. We are now on to council comments. I can't remember which end we started with last time, but we will start with Counselor Schachter today, and we will go down the row.
All right.
Can you turn on your mic for me? Thank you. Okay, great.
I guess as I was reflecting on the last week or so, I just wanted to make a comment on vibrancy. This weekend, 7th Street was full of residents, visitors, music, celebration, and busy businesses. That's vibrancy. We have Friday music this summer and movies this summer and other events. That's vibrancy. It's a benefit to visitors, businesses, and us residents. But I also see other forms of vibrancy that may be less noticed that we need to continue getting out there, whether it be 7th Street underpass. I just saw alleyway repairs today. The Meadows roads, Red Mountain roads, Blake long-term planning, fence repair on 12th Street ditch, ball field upgrades by Sopris, improvements at Sayer. These are also forms of vibrancy that I think the community has been saying, take care of us, but they don't always know it's happening. So vibrancy is a big deal and we're doing a great job. Thank you, city, but we also need to keep promoting it, including having officers on the street, on the sidewalks this weekend at the festival as well. Thank you. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, great. Counselor Cow, would you like to? Great.
Just as an update, I had a good conversation in reference to the letter that we kind of signed on to with Garfield County, asking CDOT to kind of possibly facilitate discussions about growth of traffic on I-70 and coming through Glenwood. And so I had a good conversation with Nathan Lindquist. He was kind of reaching out to the RAFTA reps on just what were we looking for, goals and that kind of thing. So I'm really hopeful that they will consider taking that role on. And he will be at the, is it ribbon cutting or groundbreaking? Groundbreaking, not quite the ribbon cutting yet for the underpass, but on that project. So anyone from council who can make it there tomorrow, I'm looking forward to that. And then also I will be going to DC on Sunday morning to lobby as part of for RAFTA for grant funding for their West Glenwood transportation hub out there. So nice to have the opportunity to do that. And
thank you for supporting, like representing us there.
Yeah, representing Glenwood. And then lastly, I'm just wondering what the format will be for our strategic plan and hoping, just looking at what we have planned on that session. You know, we just did a session with RAFTA that was 6 hours, I think. So I'm looking at our 2 hours and thinking, wow, you know, if we're going to update our strategic plan, do we have a facilitator, and do we have a very set agenda and maybe some homework? So just looking at how we're going to do that. If we've talked about that, if we haven't yet, you might want to have, see if we could have that conversation at some point.
Maybe the city manager and I could have a conversation with some structure and kind of fine tune that. Would that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
so I did offer the amount of time, and the mayor had said 2 hours. So and we did talk about this at the work session that we had off site, that we weren't going to start from scratch. We weren't going to throw it all out. It was really going to say, you know, is this still working? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's probably why it's not going to be 6 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we will talk about how we haven't had a chance. We were working more on when. Now that we've basically got the when, we can talk about the how.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we have a framework. It's just a matter of all of us either committing to, yes, the framework still is appropriate, or here's some additions. And I think it, like the homework piece, but I'll work with Beverly to kind of firm that up. Okay. Okay. Counselor Wyman.
So mine are just the updates from the from my liaison role since last council. As a reminder, Riverfest will be August 5th this year, so please put it on your calendars and keep an eye out for that. With respect, so the River Commission would very much like to submit a position paper that they what is it when you don't support something? Oppose, thank you. And 15.
You're doing
When,
awesome.
yeah, when you in opposition to the train with you went to train.
Yeah.
So the question really is, how would council like to receive that letter?
Maybe that's a question for Carl. Carl, if we have a board and commission that has expressed an interest in writing a letter of opposition to the Uinta train, the oil train routes and the increase in that, how best should we support, say, yes, please provide this letter, or what are your thoughts?
That would be moving into an area we've never had a board or commission kind of engaged in. I think historically, that's kind of a policy position that the council would take, and you guys have been very firm in that. I mean, I kind of feel like the appropriate thing is for them to communicate that to you if they want to do that formally, to do that. But and the other thing, frankly, is that you're going to be listened to far more than the commission is. So I don't know that we want to open, because then I can see the Transportation Commission wanting to take a position on pending legislation or things like that. And so I think it's probably more appropriate for them to urge you to take a position than it is to send it up, just because of the unintended
That makes
consequences.
sense. I mean, and they are, per our charter, they are a recommending body. So if they could recommend that we, as an elected board, we strongly oppose this, I think that's probably the most appropriate. Is there?
There might be also.
Can you turn on your mic really quickly? Thank you. Hold on 1 second. Go ahead.
Possibly forwarding on the environmental group that's kind of spearheading
Yeah.
some of the opposition to this. They might have sign-on ways so that commission members could
Individually.
individually sign
Yeah.
on or.
Okay. Thank you.
And then this, to wrap up with a little bit of potty talk here. From the tourism, they are planning, they've got a project planned and approved, likely for this fall, that will add some public restrooms. They're carving out some space from CMC there as you walk in. And so there will be some actual available public restrooms there as you walk in.
Great.
So it's not the potty talk some of you were hoping for,
We talked about nudies earlier.
but it's the potty talk that you're getting. With that, good night.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Counselor Dem.
Okay, got a couple of things. Last meeting, I forgot to mention Pam McMillan was appointed to the Arts and Culture Board. I'd like to recognize her, so thank you for applying and welcome to the Arts and Culture Board. And the same thing for the DDA tonight, we appointed Kevin Brady for a second term. So thank you, Kevin, for stepping up and being part of the DDA again. That's it for me.
Counselor Zelinski.
I have nothing significant to add. I just had a question, based on the strategic plan. Is this something that I have access to that I'm unaware of?
Oh, we'll work with you on that. Absolutely.
Because I was like, I'm thinking I should know, yeah, if it's gonna be like a concise 2-hour work session, I should probably have advanced reading of that.
It might have been in that folder that we got on the day that we,
Okay.
that it might have just been in there so deep that, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, like.
It was in the binder.
Yep, that's all I need. You just tell me where it is and
Yeah.
I will do my homework. In all of the newness, it has escaped my top of my mind.
Okay. Great. So I only have a couple things myself to add, and one is that I think we forget every single year, some of us forget, that the Strawberry Days Festival is put on by the tireless work of the Chamber of Commerce. It's by choice. It's not required. I think there's community members, including myself, some years that felt like it was just a standard. They had to do it. But I think just patience for new locations and new parade routes, and just gratitude that we have this festival every year and that we as a community can come together with some levity and some celebration. And also to double public notice it, that many of our current council and past council is going to be working at the beer tent from 1:30 to 4 PM on Saturday. We probably won't talk about politics with you, but we will happily provide you with a beverage. And I think it'll be a fun weekend. This is my second reminder. Don't park in illegal parking. There's lots of easily accessible parking. You can park at the mall and there is a shuttle service running. And the high school and our sewer, or our old sewer treatment plant. Or ride your bike. Or walk. But don't park illegally, whatever you do. Thank you. And I think at this point, we will move into an executive session and then, oh, sorry, city. I do this to you guys every time and I promise, please don't take it personally. Okay, moving on. City manager. Comments. I did this
I do.
every time. I do. Sorry.
So- Okay, it's okay. So I have two items. One of them is the MT 2030 Climate Summit. And I did send that out is anybody interested? Because that's something that I guess it fills up fast because of the location. So I didn't know if people had gone in the past or what.
I don't know. I don't know. Do we know?
We can get you a little bit more information about it. It's kind of the local mountain communities climate conference. I would say quite a few of the cast communities also participate in T2030. So
What's the date?
The date is it is October 17th and through the 20th, which would cover one of our council meetings. That's why I had sent it, because I said, that is something that we could look at canceling the regularly scheduled meeting and then doing a special meeting if we needed to, because I wasn't sure if that was something that it was important, if people felt that it was important for us to have representation at that. I wouldn't want somebody to have to decide between that and a council meeting.
Let's do this. Let's go ahead and maybe now that we've put it out there, maybe we could send it another reminder. I hate to do it, but if you could send, now that we've had this a little bit more robust conversation, we actually know it's on we're just aware of it. I would hate to have, I think Counselor Gotis, there's a high likelihood he'll want to attend. So maybe we could just hold off on making that decision. And then you can re-email it to us and then make the call next meeting. Thank you. Okay, awesome.
And then the other one. So we had our meeting with Mind Springs and talking about the detox. Thank you. I was drawing a blank on what it was called. And so we do have some opportunities for some grants. One of them, though, would require us to take on the responsibility for being the fiduciary, because it has to be a governmental agency. And in this particular case, it couldn't be the county, whereas the county has done some of the other ones because it is through the federal mineral lease and they have a representation on that board. So they'd be making a decision on the funding, so they wouldn't be able to also be the financial management for it. So the request has been for us to volunteer to be that pass-through financial administrator for that. And the other is that this would be for construction costs.
Yeah.
And so what that would require is if we were able to get that funding, then what we would need to do is switch the funding that we have already agreed to do was for construction and switch that to be programmatic. so that then we could use this funding for construction because it could only be used for construction, not programmatic. So the money wouldn't change. It would just be agreeing that it could be used for a different use. So if the council is amenable to that, then we can work with the group because it would also require some of the other members to make that same agreement. And everyone generally seemed, we can get more money.
Yeah.
You know, that was the important part. But really because there would be some obligation on our part as far as being the financial responsibility for that, just making sure I wasn't committing us to doing that unless the council was okay with that.
So I'm going to just run it by our legal counsel. Carl, do you see any concerns?
I really don't.
Okay.
And I think there's a fairly high likelihood, since the county controls the FMLD board,
That
that
we
we
would-
get the
okay.
funding
Okay,
because
yeah.
it reduces their costs.
Okay.
So
So,
I think
so
it's
then
probably a
I
good
think
thing.
that what I'm hearing is that we would give the authority to Beverly to agree to that and you can pursue it on our behalf. Yeah.
Everybody
Good.
nodding?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, and one of the things is we're already looking at hiring a grants administrative person just because of the volume of grants. We hope to have more. And so this would probably be fairly nominal in that. And then the only thing would be, I would imagine we'd have to bring the agreement or something back for language if we were to get that.
We get it. And then we would switch
Yep.
the
Yep.
application. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Speaking of grants, Matt told me before he went to a baseball game that we did receive the NRCS grant to do the work out around the sewer plant on the mud flows, up to $10.75 million.
Wow.
So,
More than.
which
what we
was
have.
more than, we don't think we're going to need that amount, but it was very gracious of NRCS to allocate that money to us. So
Really?
there you go.
Yeah, wow.
The other thing I was going to tell you is that starting the conversations already on what the housing bill is going to look like for next year. And I think one of the things that a little bit of, when you're really bored and you're thinking about housing, because I know Marco does all the time, is
I did pretty good at housing.
you absolutely. No, you guys have been really great. And my ask would be to start thinking about the things that the state can do that we can't. Because I think one of the problems we ran into with 213 was that the state was trying to get into the local government business. And there are things we do really well, and there are things that we can't do for a variety of reasons. And so I guess I would just throw it out there for you guys to start thinking about, what we can't do. Whether that's revenue stream, whether that's dealing with covenants on a global basis, any of those kinds of things. And give me some feedback on that, because I'm definitely starting. I had a long conversation with Nathan Lindquist about what the next iteration is going to look like potentially and what that process is going to be. And I tried to advocate with him that we really need to think about kind of dividing up what do we do well between our two respective levels of government, and maybe the state should focus on what they do well and leave us to do what we do well. So just food for thought, and give me some input on that.
Is there anything worth learning or that we
Can
can
you-
learn from what
Can you
Montana
turn
just passed?
your map
Sorry.
on? Oh, your mic. There you go.
Yes, there is. I haven't spent any time with it, but I know what you're talking about, the Montana model.
I don't know if it's worth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's, and it's nice to see another state that's kind of working on it in the Intermountain West, because it's just a little bit different here in the resort communities than it is on either one of the coasts.
Perfect. Counselor Dunn.
Yeah, just real quick. Since you probably know, I'm speaking for myself, since you know more than I will ever know, would this make sense if we had a workshop over it? I know we're tight on workshop space. I get it. And we're moving,
Yeah, I think it would, maybe a short one.
just so you can say things that we're not thinking of.
Yeah, we can do that.
Wouldn't that-
We'll
wouldn't that
find
make more
even
sense?
15 minutes, 20 minutes. That we
Yeah.
can kind of plug that in. Because I do have some things that I'm thinking maybe we want to push the state on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Now that we had a chance to hear from you both, thank you so much. I will move to go into executive session. And after the end of our executive session, we will automatically adjourn the meeting. Yep. Perfect. Motion to approve or and then, yeah, I know I'm going there. She threw me when she said motion. I was like, what? No, one thing. Okay, great. Next is in the process of adjusting everything. So continue. We have an executive